last night saying, what the hell is this? And it was just that clip you're talking about.
Really?
Yeah.
So the first one might be watched quite incessantly, but I suspect episodes 2, 3, 4, whatever, however many there are is not. Right, sorry, mate, you've got 30 seconds to talk about what's coming up on your wonderful show.
We will touch on Meghan, I'm sure. We'd be failing not to, of course. We'll also talk about why there isn't a specific inquiry. There's been lots of different inquiries, and the Baroness J report, etc., which took years to complete, but that only touched some of it. Specific inquiry into this one area of rape gangs that we've been talking about for the last couple of days. We'll continue with that.
Indeed. Right, that's Ian Collins coming up. I've been Russell Quirk. Thank you to Anna Mendoza for the last 3 hours. This is Talk. I will see you soon.
I spoke with His Majesty the King to request the dissolution of Parliament, and we will have a general election on the 4th of July.
I have just returned from Buckingham Palace to...
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
And yes, good afternoon. Welcome to the home of common sense. Thank you to Russell Quirk. Back soon, right here on Talk. It's 3 minutes after 1 o'clock. Busy show this afternoon. We will continue to talk about what is happening or not happening in the rape gang scandal. Elon Musk labelling Jess Phillips, the minister, a rape genocide apologist after her decision to reject an inquiry into the specifics of the Oldham grooming story. We'll look more at that in a few moments. Meanwhile, the government denies it's putting off social care reforms following criticism of a planned overhaul of the sector that may not happen until the end of 2028. What takes them so long? Why is every decision from this government like turning around a flipping oil tanker? What is going on there? And as you've been hearing, Meghan Markle has announced her new big TV project. It's a series for Netflix titled With Love, Meghan, where she highlights her purest pursuit of joy over perfection. Well, certainly over perfection. That's reasonable. Details to come. Everything you need to know. All the breaking news right here on Talk. 0344 499 1000. I'm going to throw this question out. We talked a little bit about it yesterday, and we had two very passionate voices on, two very passionate guests talking about the scandal, the ineptitude, the shortcomings of any authentic or meaningful inquiry into the very specific nature of what has been called grooming gangs. You can use the term rape gangs, which kind of does perhaps solidify the seriousness of what we are talking about, more so than grooming. It perhaps falls short, it underplays something perhaps in that. There was an inquiry, of course. We know that Baroness J had an inquiry which lasted about 7 years. And that concluded that an estimated 1,400 children had been sexually abused in Rotherham between 1997 and 2013. This is predominantly by British Pakistani men. Now, that is just one part of a massive story. It's so big, I don't think there's any words I could really do justice to this. 1,400 girls, and this is just the period that they looked at, over 6 short years, sexually abused by one specific group of men. When it comes to areas, we can look at Keighley, we can look at Blackpool, Oldham, Blackburn, Sheffield, Manchester, Skipton, Rochdale, more than one there, Nelson, Preston, Rotherham, Derby, Telford, Bradford, Ipswich, Birmingham, Oxford, Barking, Peterborough. Man alive. I mean, is that not in the fact that I can read that list out? And I tell you now, that list will be bigger. This is just the cases we know about. The fact that a bloke sitting on the radio can read a list like that, all of these are areas that highlight where there has been industrial-scale abuse of young white girls, predominantly at the hands of British Pakistani males. If that isn't a reason for an specific inquiry into that, look, the J report was a wider brief. The independent inquiry into child sex abuse, sexual abuse, covered a range of institutions. So. And it was very thorough in what it tried to do. I understand that. And Baroness J, I think, chaired this very difficult task, culminating in a report which was published in October 2022. And I think she did as well as she could. But in this very specific area, there should be an inquiry. Now, Jess Phillips, of course, doesn't want an inquiry. Jess Phillips talked for years about how there should be an inquiry, and then somebody made her a minister, and therefore she no longer supports an inquiry. Conservative leader Kemi Badenoch has called for a full national public inquiry into the UK's rape gang scandal. Jess Phillips rejected the Oldham Council's request for a government-led inquiry into historic child sexual exploitation, saying that the council should lead it instead. No, Jess Phillips, you can't get away with that. This is way too big than just deferring it to a local council level. This is a very different view, of course, to the one she had in opposition. It almost feels profoundly at odds, I think we could say, with a subject that she championed for years, the abuse of women and young girls. In fact, she would annually read out a list in Parliament of women who've been killed due to domestic and sexual violence. It was a subject and an issue she held dear. If you were looking for somebody in Parliament to talk about exploitation and abuse, then you might call Jess Phillips' office to say, would she like to come on and talk about it? It was an area that she had researched, discussed, debated and given speeches on over the many times. And if she becomes a minister, absolutely nada. Nothing at all. So what is going on here? 0344 499 1000. The J report, let me just pick up on Rotherham as an example. The J report into the failings of Rotherham says by far the majority of perpetrators were described as Asians by victims. Yet throughout the entire period, counsellors did not engage directly with the Pakistani heritage community to discuss how best they could jointly address the issue. So you have 1,400 people under one council, 1,400 children under one council who were sexually abused and exploited at the hands of Asian, British Pakistani men. And the local council could see no reason to engage with that community. Some councillors seem to think it was a one-off. There were 1,400 kids here, which they hoped would go away. Several staff described their nervousness about identifying the ethnic origins of perpetrators for fear of being thought racist. Others remembered clear direction from their managers not to do so. So this was absolutely carved out to deny and advance a specific narrative. Now, CEOP, which is the Child Exploitation and Online Protection Command, CEOP data about the ethnicity of offenders and suspects identified by those 31 police forces in 2012 is incomplete. The unit says all ethnicities were represented in the sample. However, a disproportionate number of offenders were British Pakistani men. Now, I've never thought this is a thing specifically about a religion, but this is about a culture. There is no doubt about that. And in any other walk of life, and I said this yesterday, if you were watching an episode of Columbo and Columbo was trying to solve the crime and he looked at that big old list that I just read you there, Blackburn, Sheffield, Rochdale, Derby, Telford, Bradford, Ipswich, Birmingham, Oxford, Barking, Peter, I'm not even going to go over the whole list again. If you were looking at that, then I think Columbo would probably say, OK, what's the commonality in all of this? Let's have a look at what the common factors are and we'll take it from there. Council after council refused to do so. Social workers refused to do so. Chief police officers, I don't believe the average Bobby on the beat took their command on this one. This came from elsewhere. Refused to do so. People like Jess Phillips were talking about the outrage of this, why there should be an inquiry. Local councils did very little. Inept doesn't really cover it when it comes to getting the full story out there. The Jade report did its bit, but it was a wider brief covering other things. Should there now be a specific report into grooming gangs? There's a question. We're joined by Matthew Larser, former Labour advisor. Good to see you, Matthew.
It's always good to be with you, Ian.
And Happy New Year.
And Happy New Year.
And all that. It's nearly Christmas.
Absolutely, I know.
Yes.
I mean,
We're
you know
almost around it.
I'm actually gutted because I think I might have been the first person to spot Easter eggs in the shops because I had them in my Sainsbury's on the 23rd.
Are they out?
I tweeted it. Oh yeah, they're out. Pretty. They're going across the country.
They don't
but I had them on the 23rd of December. So yeah, it's almost Easter.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Lots of stories to look through here, including this one. We can get a clip here of Jess Phillips, Labour, blocking an inquiry into Keir Starmer being the head of the Crown Prosecution Service while the Oldham child grooming scandal is being investigated. Meanwhile, Jess Phillips, the Safeguarding Minister, has refused to launch a public inquiry into historical sexual abuse by gangs in Oldham. Well, that wasn't really her take on these things this time last year. Let's have a listen to what she used to think on this.
We're a year on from the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse. Years and years worth of evidence. And a year on, not a single one of the recommendations. The government have said they'll take some of them. There's no timeline for when any of those recommendations are going to happen, and that's both about prevention and supporting of victims who have been victims of sexual violence in childhood.
Matthew, what happened to Jess Phillips?
So, look, I don't think the government is trying to ignore the issue, and it shouldn't ignore the issue because, you know, as you said in your introduction, it's such an important and it's such a scandalous thing that the way that authorities reacted and, frankly, didn't react over so many years to this issue. I think what Jess was saying there was about implementing recommendations that we've had from, as you said, the Alexis J inquiry wasn't specifically into the grooming gangs, it was into the whole wider issue, but there are conclusions there. Louise Casey, who actually is in the news today because she's been appointed to look at social care. She looked specifically at Rotherham, which is probably the worst, most egregious example, and I think that her recommendations from her report. So what Jess was saying there is that the previous government hadn't put into place the recommendations. So I think we need to hold Jess Phillips' feet to the fire on putting into place, on actually acting upon what has already been said in various inquiries.
And, you know, I said this yesterday, look, previous Labour ministers had taken exactly the same, Conservative ministers had taken exactly the same line, that this should be done at local level. I think the appetite seems to be, now this has sort of resurfaced in the most curious way, because Elon Musk seems to have got the narrative going again. Whatever we think about him and his, you know, interference, if you want to call it that, or his interest, if you want to be polite, in British politics, which I've never heard him mention before, but suddenly he's all over
it's
it.
Interesting,
like a
that,
rash.
isn't it?
It is interesting. But regardless of that, it has nonetheless sort of reared up this this discussion again. Local level, I mean, having these inquiries at local level is one thing, but the sense, Matthew, is that this is so big that it deserves specific inquiry. The J report looked at a wider brief.
Yeah, it did.
But this is very specific. Is it because Labour cannot bear to consider what is central to this, and that is that the majority of perpetrators by a country mile were British Pakistani men and gangs? Is that the problem?
So the
left,
yeah.
and I politely include yourself in
absolutely.
this.
You're maybe reasonable, but I'm still on the left.
You're an old lefty, Matthew. Oh, less of the old, maybe. But isn't it? It's in your DNA not to want to go there, isn't it?
So there's two issues there. Just on the specifics of the inquiry, what I'm hearing is that there may well that the government is not saying no to a widespread inquiry into the whole of the national problem. What actually happened in this instance of the letter that Elon Musk got very excited about is that Oldham Council passed a resolution saying we'd like an inquiry. Rather than doing it themselves, they thought it would be just easier to pop a letter into the government saying, can you do it for us? And her letter actually says, no, you need to specifically look at your own failings. It doesn't say the government isn't going to look at the wider problem. So last night, when this story broke, I was hearing that from the government that, you know, we're not saying we're not going to do an inquiry, watch this space. So, and I would urge them, for what my two pennyworth is worth, I would urge them to actually set up a national inquiry that can look at everything in context. I think the government can't do, the central government can't do 20 different inquiries into, there's so many, it's a multi-headed hydra.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we need to look at the thing across the piece. On the issue of is the left sort of too politically correct, as it were, too sensitive to issues around race and religion, and therefore won't call out what has happened and what sadly seems to still be happening? I think the answer is historically a kind of, not just the Labour Party, although in lots of these parts of the country the Labour Party was locally in charge. I think the sort of the liberal feeling was that people wouldn't tackle it. So we saw specifically when they looked into Rotherham as one of the, you know, as the original example, that people were ignoring what was going on because there were sensitivities around that. That was wrong, and I'm glad that Labour councillors lost their jobs, that the then Police and Crime Commissioner for South Yorkshire was Labour, had to resign, etc. And I'm glad that people like Sarah Champion, who's the MP in Rotherham, spoke out. She wrote in The Sun about that we shouldn't be afraid to be clear where these gangs are coming from in terms of...
Some people were unhappy with her when she wrote that.
They were, and they were wrong, and I hope that people have calmed... I hope that people in the left have realised that you don't do anybody a favour. You don't do the Muslim community a favour by trying to just hush this under the carpet.
Of course.
Because, of course, I mean, obviously, we've seen that young white girls and young women, white women have been often the victims, but there are clearly issues within the Muslim community as well in the treatment of women and girls when you've got perpetrators doing things like this in those towns. So nobody wins it by hushing anything up. Sunlight is the best disinfectant, you know,
That's true.
I believe that you cannot have too much exposure of what's going on, because we need to say that this is unacceptable as a society and tackle it.
And there are so many examples, aren't there, in this? There was one of the police chiefs, I saw a clip the other day, I think it was at a select committee, being questioned by one MP who said, look, you know, one of your officers turned up at a house. There was a young girl there. She was about 12 and drunk. She was then arrested for being drunk and disorderly. 5 adult males, I mean, if that wasn't suspicious in itself, were simply left in situ. There was the social worker who was told when she raised this very point and said, look, there might just be an issue in this particular community, or a part of this particular community, she was told to go on a racial awareness course. And there's dozens of
It's
these
literally
examples.
the definition of Kafkaesque, isn't it? That you raise the concerns and you're literally told you're the problem and not the problem that you've identified. I mean, they are outrageous examples. Because, of course, one of the things that really strikes me as well is it's not just about race, it's also about class. If these young women, the young white women, had been middle class, I think they would have been listened to. But basically, they were just dismissed because they were thought, oh, women in those, you know, from those social groups just do this. So, I mean, it was on every level, it was outrageous. And we've seen brave people like Maggie Oliver, the police officer in Greater Manchester,
who we're talking to later in this hour,
who's you know, an absolute hero. You know, and we need to make sure that nothing is swept under the carpet again. So if that needs a national inquiry, it needs one. I think Jess Phillips is defendable in terms of this specific action. We need to make sure the government does the right thing across the board.
Matthew Laza is with us, former Labour advisor. We'll talk more to Matthew in a couple of moments' time. Social care is on the agenda as well. And the Duchess, as in Meghan, is back cooking cakes for the telly. We'll have a little gander into that territory as well. I know we have to. All of that and more on the way. And that question, should there be a specific inquiry into grooming gangs? We'll open the lines on that as well. 0344 499 1000.
Luke Littler is from Warrington, and his semi-final opponent was Stephen Bunting, who's from St Helens, so they're right next to each other. They know each other really well. They go back a long way, and it was a very good-natured semi-final. A lot of fist-bumping in between sets, which some fans don't like because actually it shows like, where's the edge?
They like the rivalry.
Yeah, but they go back such a long way, so there's a bit of criticism about that. But Luke Littler won 6-1. Tonight is the best of 13 sets, so it's the first of 7.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Matthew Laza is still with us. Sorry about that. He's former... former Labour advisor, an all-round good bloke. You mentioned Louise Casey just a Baroness Casey as she is now. She had an interesting journey. She's now sort of super chair, isn't she?
She's the kind of misfixit of the government.
Yeah, she worked for the last lot.
Yeah,
she worked for...
Absolutely. She started in homelessness charities, didn't she? And then she was the homelessness czar for a while, and then now she's the anything czar.
Well, she was homeless czar, and then she sort of, I think, didn't she go out and get a bit drunk one night or something like that? Yeah.
Yes.
And nobody held it against her.
No, she's... I mean, the thing is, she's a real person. She's not part of the blob, as it were.
So she worked for the Tories in terms of inquiries and the like, and now Labour have appointed her to lead an independent commission into social care. I mean, what are we doing with this social care? I remember when Boris Johnson became Prime Minister, remember the speech at Downing Street? It's the bit, I really believed this bit as well. He said, finally, you know, I will get to grips with social care. I thought, do you know what? He's clever enough, this bloke, because whatever you think of Johnson, he's clever enough to get that box ticked as his legacy. He did nothing. I know that COVID was going on.
No, absolutely.
And that was a big sticking point. But it just seems beyond the brief of any government to sort this thing out.
Well, I think you're absolutely right on the word legacy, because this is one of those issues that matters to families up and down the country. I can't think of a family that hasn't, you know, faced the issue of an elderly relative who needs care, or who's worried about the potentially needing care and impacting them and their families. And so you'd think for every politician this would be one of those things that they would want to go down in history as the person who solved it. Now, I think that Wes Streeting does want to do that. When I heard the word commission, I groaned too, because this government, I think, has got a little bit... I mean, we talked about the absence at the moment of an inquiry into child grooming. It hasn't been...
If you want to delay something, have a commission.
Kick it into the long grass. And, you know, this government's got into a bit of a habit of setting up commissions. So I was sort of groaning, and then there was this... The thing that Johnson was going to implement is the thing called the Dilnot Report. So Andrew Dilnot, who was the chief number cruncher at the IFS, the old Institute of Fiscal Studies we all turn to, he was commissioned by the coalition to do this report on into social care. Came up with a set of conclusions that basically would cap fees that any family would have to pay, and then so that you would have to contribute, but there would be a cap, so you could plan your family finances. And then Theresa talked about. Cameron wasn't around long enough. Theresa talked about it. Then, of course, Theresa went. She had the problem with the sort of what was called the death tax in the 2017 election. Yeah, which then sort of that scared off politicians.
By 6 p.m. on the day she announced it, that was gone.
That was dead. No pun intended. Every pun intended. So, and therefore Johnson came in, but thought he had the political capital to do it. And then Rishi, as Chancellor, stopped him doing it. And then as Prime Minister, didn't do anything. So the government came in. It had the Dilnot Report, still sitting on the shelf in Whitehall, gathering dust, probably quite a lot of dust on it by this stage. And then the Labour government said it wouldn't do it. So we thought, what the heck? What are you going to do about this? So now it's saying it's going to do this commission. Now, I have a little bit... I'm not keen on commissions. I have a little bit of faith in this because, as you said, Louise Casey is a bit of a misfixit. She's a kind of no-nonsense figure. It's not a judge they've given it to sort of spend 9 years gathering evidence. And what they say is that this is rather than starting from a blank sheet of paper. What this is to do is to bring together the Dilnot Commission, other stuff that's been done, sort of work out a plan and present a plan in a year. So they better do it, because if they kick it into the long grass, they will suffer.
Yeah, indeed. Let's move to this. Officials have now said that the terrorist who killed at least 14 people on New Year's Day in New Orleans was definitely inspired by ISIS, but did act alone. Let's have a listen to what President Joe Biden said in a speech yesterday.
We're also continuing to investigate whether or not there's any connection between the New Orleans attack and the explosion in Las Vegas. As of now, they've just been briefed. They have not found any evidence of such a connection thus far. I've directed them to keep looking. The individual who rented the truck that exploded in Las Vegas also served as active duty U.S. Army. And the FBI is working with the Department of Defense on investigating, including the service members' possible motives and all those he worked with, who served with him.
That's the president, or at least for the next few weeks, on his response to that. We asked the question, Matthew, yesterday about how does the West, if you like, respond to these kind of, whether it's a nightclub in Orlando, whether it's London Bridge just out there, Manchester. How does the West respond to this? And there is a really regrettable response. You cannot ever fully guarantee that you can ward off or stop lone acts of people who are following a balmy idea. a lethal idea because you're fighting someone's thought process.
Absolutely, and we've seen
How
that.
do you do that?
Absolutely, and we've seen that in America. When it first happened, we thought that it might be actually on the other sort of side of the political fence, as it were, because we saw with the Oklahoma bombing, sort of 30 years ago, when a guy sort of full of crazy ideas against the federal government, blew up the federal building in Oklahoma, and that was hugely totemic in American sort of attitudes to their government. So I think it's impossible, and I think we will also have to make sure that we don't let these people win by overreacting the other way. I mean, we've got a thing coming in which is called Martin's Law, which is the mum of a guy called Martin who died in the Manchester arena bombing has been campaigning for this, Martin Heck, and this is now the law, which is basically any venue with which has events for over 100 people now has to have in place an anti-terrorism plan. Sounds good in theory, but on the other hand, it means your bag is going to be searched. We've all been in to theatre, to gigs where your bag is to do that, and frankly what they're looking for is if you've got a bottle of, you've got a mini vodka in there and you're at the bar taking, more than they are likely to find a bomb, because in the 3 seconds that they're looking in your bag, that's all they can find. Have you got any glass in there? As you know, we've all been asked that question. So I think sometimes the reaction actually is over the top, and in a sense I worry about we can't let them win.
It is, yeah, it's that freedom thing. I had this, I went to see, as you do, Disney on Ice the other day, and it was that's a
good Christmas thing.
Adam, our producer, finds this hilarious, and so, I find myself all smiles because I'm going to see the Disney people, and before I know it, there's a man looking for my fluffy Mowgli. And I know that's what he's doing. He's got his hand right in there, and he's determined to think, has he already bought his own merch with him?
Absolutely.
Because I look like a big Disney fan.
You do, you look like, yeah.
He's got...
My mind is now running... yeah.
He's got a Dumbo ready to release at some point. But yeah, that is part of it now, isn't it? That you are searched, and we kind of relinquish a bit of freedom.
And it's going to get worse because of it. I mean, or better, depending on your point of view, because of this new law. And, I used to deliver Labour Party leaflets to their family home because they live near my mum. I mean, it really brings it home. On the other, so yes, it sounds like a good idea. On the other hand, is it really going to stop somebody?
Someone who's determined, indeed.
Exactly.
Let's finish on sort of a lighter note. Meghan Markle, Duchess of Sussex, has released the trailer for her 8-part Netflix series. It's called With Love, Meghan. Let's have a look.
I'm going to share some little tips and tricks. I see what color I gravitate to, and everything goes from there. And how you can incorporate these practices every day. That's what you want. You want that shape and texture. Come on. This is about connecting with friends. I love that we're doing this together for the first time. Making new friends. That is so good.
We're family now.
And just learning. Look at how much honey we have.
Do you believe in love?
What a lot of old shocking nonsense, eh?
Beautifully done there.
That's Meghan's new show.
Yeah,
I don't know why she's doing this show.
Well, I mean, so they've got
lots of money.
Yes, well, they've got this deal with Netflix, haven't they? So they're working out their contract, as they say in the biz, I believe.
Oh, that's still part of the existing deal.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. What I particularly love is that when you see the cake-making shots, Angelica, do you remember that from the 70s? That sort of green sort of stuff that served no purpose apart from going on top of a cake. She uses that. So I'm not sure she's at the cutting edge. I actually watched Fanny Craddock, and we're just about, the kind of hilarious British cook from the 60s and 70s, whose husband used to come on with the wines.
Yes.
Available on another channel's iPlayer. Absolutely hilarious over Christmas, and it just struck me that I think she's an unintentional new Fanny Craddock, i.e. she's going to be laughed at more for laughing at her than people are going to be watching the rest of it.
Do you know, I can tell this on it, and I was only telling the guys this the other day. I don't know if this is an urban myth about Fanny and Johnny Craddock. Do you know the donut story?
No.
They were apparently, she spent that particular show making donuts, and it came to the end of the show, and she said, that's the recipe for how you do it. And then Johnny looks at the camera and says, "Thank you very much for watching, everybody. Good luck with the cooking, and I hope all of your donuts turn out just like Fanny's." Now, I don't know whether that is...
It wasn't, but I only saw the Christmas special, which are in 15-minute segments. I have to say, her stuffing of the bird, I'll never unsee.
You'll never I'm going to have to look for this now. Fanny Craddock, good Lord.
But I fear that, you know, she's... I mean, let's face it, I mean, she hasn't made any of that food. It's all absolutely ludicrous, and I'm not sure it's going to do anything.
There's a lot of posh people in a very big mansion.
Exactly.
Having extravagant food.
Very American food.
With a backdrop of opulence.
Absolutely. Although one thing is, there is a shot of a Victoria Sponge who is she trying to send signals that she, you know, that is that trying to build bridges with Britain by going for that, not a carrot cake or a
I will
pie.
not take this show seriously until she whips out a Mr. Kipling's.
Oh,
when she does that.
What's your favourite?
Well, I don't think you can knock a Mr. Kipling's apple pie, frankly.
Ah, you see, my dad was obsessed with Mr. Kipling's Country Slices. Divorced parents. So the only thing that was ever around when I went round on a Saturday afternoon was in Mr. Kipling's Country Slice.
And, of course, I'm partial to an iced fancy. Who isn't? Matthew, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Matthew Larser with us here on Talk. Back with more from you in a couple of moments' time. Lots of calls and comments on the way right now. Just gone 1:30.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
This in from Chris in Newbury, who says Starmer pushing back social care till 2028 is irrelevant. Starmer is now irrelevant. His legacy has been affirmed in the first 6 months. Grifter, liar, charlatan, incompetent. The only person happy this week is Rachel Reeves, as her disastrous winter fuel decision is off the front pages until snow arrives tomorrow. On January the 20th, Starmer's next 4 years policy will be set by Trump. Starmer is finished by March, says Chris. It's a grim prediction. I'm assuming Chris doesn't work for the PR department of Number 10. Thank you, Chris, for a very honest analysis on what he feels is going on in the corridors of power. And connected to that, of course, what some are saying is almost criminal ineptitude. Labour blocking calls for a national inquiry into historic child abuse in Oldham, saying it's for the council to decide whether one is necessary or not. Now, the scandal was one of several, of course, across the country. I read out that exhausting list a little earlier. Dozens of girls, hundreds of girls abused by British Pakistani gangs. It comes as Elon Musk has labelled Safeguarding Minister Jess Phillips as a rape genocide apologist over the decision. We'll talk to Maggie Oliver in just a moment. You'll be familiar with Maggie's work in this area. She's a former detective as well from Greater Manchester Police. But first, Kim Harrison is with us, Head of Abuse and Public Inquiries at Slater and Gordon Lawyers. Kim, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year as well. Look, as far as I can work this out, I'm thinking about the Baroness J report here. This went on for many, many years. I'm sure Baroness J was doing her best on this. But that was a wider brief, right? That was about many institutions and all sorts of areas connected to sexual exploitation of children and abuse of children. What we're talking about here now is far more specific. Grooming gangs, rape gangs, whatever term somebody feels is right. It's that specific area that there is now a re-emerging feeling that justice simply hasn't been done. Do you share that?
Yes, I do. Justice certainly hasn't been done. I think there are a number of things that could be done quite quickly to start to make things better. But I think there's a huge amount to do. I represented, along with my colleague, over 100 victims and survivors in the National Child Abuse Inquiry. You're right, one of those modules related to child sexual exploitation, and Maggie Oliver was involved in that module as well. I represented the only victim and survivor in that module. Maggie was obviously representing her charity and the work that she'd done as a whole. But there was only one victim and survivor in that part of the inquiry module, which I thought was crazy because there's obviously huge numbers of victims and survivors in the country. So the inquiry itself, I think, was flawed. But the recommendations that came out of that inquiry, both the interim report in February 22 into child sexual exploitation and the final report in October 2022 does have some recommendations that, if the government got on and implemented, would make children safer in the here and now, but also would provide redress to victims and survivors. And that's what we need to do. We need to implement the recommendations that have been made.
When did you sort of start to hear about this? When did you hear from victims who were approaching you and your office to look for some kind of representation? They'd looked everywhere. The places you'd think you might get some kind of justice, certainly initially, would be the police. It might well be social services, other authority figures. Wherever these young girls seemed to turn, there was not only a closed door, but they were pretty much told to shut up and not make a fuss. And then that was echoed by institution after institution. When was your first... When was that moment when a penny dropped and you thought, hang on a second, something rather serious and bigger than we're told is going on here?
I think that's been apparent for many, many years. I've been dealing with this sort of work for about 2 decades. Other colleagues in my office for even longer. We started, not myself, but my colleague, dealing with the North Wales Child Abuse Inquiry, which was child abuse on a huge scale in North Wales children's homes, and that was many decades ago. Then you move through to the child sexual exploitation that we've seen in towns such as Rochdale, Rotherham, Oxford, Telford. But to be honest, it is a nationwide problem. It's not just the North, and I think that is something that as somebody who lives in Manchester and who works in Manchester, we often found quite frustrating, because we felt sometimes it was being labelled as a bit of, it's that problem in the North, those sort of people up there. It's not a big enough problem, but actually it's a nationwide problem, and that's something that the Independent Inquiry into Child Sexual Abuse did conclude in their report, and it needs a nationwide solution. And some of those solutions, such as mandatory reporting, where it would be a criminal offence not to make a report of suspicion of child abuse if you were a professional involved in certain roles, like a social worker or a teacher or a sports coach. That could not just help children who are being groomed and sexually exploited on our streets, but it could help children who are being groomed and sexually exploited in all sorts of different contexts, in religious institutions, in care homes, in schools. This is why, if we implement these recommendations, we can start to see laws with real teeth, so that there are consequences for failing to report abuse.
Do you sense, and you're absolutely right, looking at the, geographically, and I'm sure, this is only the tip of the iceberg, and the Jade report did acknowledge, I'm thinking of areas like Ipswich, Barking, Peterborough, which aren't those northern towns that, initially perhaps people had imagined it only took place there, all over the country, and clearly thousands of victims, and I'm sure that the official list that is out there, if that is the right way to define it, hardly touches the sides on the size of this problem, which, and a lot of people now saying it's probably still ongoing as well. Well, what is extraordinary about this is if this was 1972, this idea of this wall of silence and this, keep quiet sort of response that seemed to come from authority, you could kind of, sort of in a curious way, make sense of it, but it isn't. This was in the 2000s when people were coming forward. We'd had scandals in areas like the Catholic Church where we know that the wall of silence, and this can never happen again, it's important to listen to these voices, and yet the very opposite happened here. I mean, it could not have been a more spectacular example of victims being told to literally shut up. And also others, the odd, what you'd call a whistleblower. I don't think that fully defines what people were trying to do there. Even those people were told, keep quiet about this. There were clear, and the J report did acknowledge this, there were obvious racial sensitivities around this that seemed to become more important than victims of industrial-scale sexual abuse. This is 10 years ago.
The data is absolutely appalling, and that's one of the things that the inquiry picked up on, mainly the February 22 report, although it is mentioned in the October 22 report as well. Until we get the data sorted, we can't really look at the scale of the problem, and police forces don't record necessarily child sexual exploitation in the same way. There's no such thing as the crime of child sexual exploitation, so you can't tick a box on a computer saying child sexual exploitation. Everything's recorded in slightly different ways. Whether or not somebody's race or ethnicity is recorded, whether they've got learning disabilities, whether they're male, female, all really depends on the individual police force, whether that's the alleged victim or the alleged perpetrator. So there's so many issues with data, can't even, we could spend a whole hours talking just about that. But I think that the key is we need to start to implement the recommendations. I understand why victims and survivors and those that care about victims and survivors are calling for further inquiries. I really, really do. I am concerned that if we just go down that route of spending more money on inquiries rather than spending the money on actual implementing recommendations to make people safer in the here and now, that potentially it won't make things any better. An inquiry can't determine civil or criminal liability, so you can't lock somebody up from a finding of an inquiry. That would have to be a matter for the police and the Crown Prosecution Service. So it
could have the very opposite effect in many respects to what some people in spirit at least hope will happen. And that's the inquiries have a great habit of kicking things into the long grass, of course.
Yeah, that's correct. And if you look at, there's so many different inquiries. I mean, I represented a number of the victims' families in the Manchester Arena bombing inquiry. Over half the victims were my clients in terms of the bereaved. And we're still waiting for a load of those recommendations to be implemented. Don't get me wrong, a public inquiry can be a huge tool for redress, accountability and justice, but we've now got a lot of them lined up on the shelf, and none of the recommendations are being implemented. And that's what I want to see now. Sort of less talk and more action, really.
Kim, very thorough stuff. Thank you for your time. Really appreciate it. Kim Harrison, Head of Abuse and Public Inquiries at Slater and Gordon Lawyers. Let's speak with Maggie Oliver. Former Detective Constable, Greater Manchester Police, also spoke out on the Rochdale grooming gang case as well, and founder, of course, of the Maggie Oliver Foundation. Afternoon to you, Maggie. Interesting what Kim was just saying, that an inquiry, certainly on the face of it, does sound like, of course, we need an inquiry. We've had a 7-year inquiry with Baroness J. What Kim was asking for there was action.
Yeah, hi, Ian. I mean, I heard the last bit of your interview with the lawyer from Slater and Gordon, and I know Richard Scorer quite well. Anybody who follows this issue will know that this has consumed 20 years of my life. And if I had £1 for every time I'd spoken to a public official, I would be a millionaire. And they talk the talk and they say the right things, and then absolutely nothing happens. You know, I've been involved in the Rochdale Review, the Augusta Manchester Review, a little bit in the Oldham Review that was put together by Andy Burnham. Absolutely nothing has happened from them. The National Abuse Inquiry, and I was a non-institutional core participant alongside several others from Parents Against Child Exploitation, Centre for Women's Justice, many others. It was a complete and utter corrupt investigation. The organised networks strand, in inverted commas, was meant to look at grooming gangs. It was given 2 weeks. 95% of the time that it was given was spent allowing chief constables and heads of social services come into that in inverted commas, independent inquiry and spout off nonsense about how things were better. The non-institutional core participants like me, like other experts who work with victims, were blocked from saying a word. My 58-page statement was reduced to 18 pages. They were hidden. None of the 20 recommendations made have been implemented, and I have no faith in Labour government, in the Conservative government. I think we need a completely outside body. And I've seen, obviously, everything about Elon Musk, but I don't trust the officials in our country to want to get to the truth. If they wanted to get to the truth, there are many, many experts, there are many survivors who have lived and breathed this horror story, this corruption, for years. And before I'd like to get a word in, Ian, the other thing I would say is that the official findings of the Augusta Manchester Review in 2020 was that Greater Manchester Police, the Chief Constable and the Gold Command Group deliberately closed down that investigation with 100 paedophiles. That I worked on that case on a database. It was a deliberate closing down of a live investigation because they decided they would not put resources in. 5 of those senior officers who made that decision were referred to the alleged Independent Office for Police Conduct. None of them would be interviewed. None of them were dealt with. They are still walking the streets with their pensions, unaccountable for gross criminal neglect. These are, you peel back a layer. It's like an onion. This just goes on and on and on. And I could fill a whole day, the abusers out of prison in less than 4 years. Sure. A man who raped a 12-year-old not being charged with rape when we had a fetus, some DNA. He was out of prison, back in Rochdale, back in his community, not deported, arguing he had a right to a family life. Yeah. This is a national scandal. And I, for one, am really glad that somebody outside of this country, and I know it's Elon Musk, and I know there are some people who think he's great and some people who think he's not. I'm not a party political person, but we need somebody who has got teeth, who will stand up and fight an establishment that is doing everything it possibly can to silence the victims who have been failed for decades, Ian.
Do you think, Maggie, and I'm aware we haven't got long, so, and it's unfortunate given the nature of what we're talking about here, but as briefly as you can, is this all about, I mean, you mentioned, the police officers walking the streets, facing no allegations, various social workers who tried to speak out, told to go on a racial awareness course, etc. Is all of this just about racial sensitivities, or is there something else going on?
I think that's a big part of it, if I'm honest. I am not blaming individual police officers. I was a good police officer. I lost everything when I spoke publicly, but I did that knowing that I have to look myself in the mirror and know I've spoken the truth. This is about people at the top of these organisations who are unwilling and completely blind to wanting to make a difference.
Why is that, though, Maggie? Is it? I mean, you spoke out. You could see what was in plain sight. Were these people thinking, look, if we really kick off with this, there's going to be riots on the street. We're going to be accused of racism. Was it that was underpinning this?
I do think that's part of it, and as I've said on my Twitter, you know, Keir Starmer was Director of Public Prosecutions at the time when he sent out, or Gordon Brown sent out a circular in 2008 saying don't prosecute these grooming gangs. These kids are complicit in their abuse. So that is one element. The finances and the prioritising of these children is another one. And the other thing is that when somebody gets to the top of a public body, they have climbed that slippery pole. Their job is to protect that organisation, and they will lie through their teeth. They will cover up the truth.
Well, it's what happened with the Archbishop of Canterbury, isn't it? You know, it's that same thing of, you know, we try to protect the institution, and then this kind of weird, perverse groupthink kicks in. Listen, Maggie, we will speak again on... Sadly, we will speak again on this. I mean this in the kindest way. Maggie Oliver, former detective at Greater Manchester Police. She spoke out and paid the price. Over to you on this one. Do we now need a specific inquiry into grooming gangs? This is Talk.
You buy into our system, you buy into our values, our culture, our fantastic liberal approach to life, and you accept what it means to be British.
So does that mean then? Does that mean? Okay, fine. Fine. Hang on a second. I need to ask you. So, if that is the case, does that mean that, for example, anybody of, say, black Afro-Caribbean background, does that mean that people cannot or should not be referred to it? I mean, for example, should we be even naming tube lines the Windrush line?
No, I don't think we should. I think everyone should be treated equally.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Thank you to Dave in Southport as well, who says, respect to Maggie Oliver. Thank you. She should get an MBE. Darn right. Let's talk to Dave in South Wales on this issue. Dave, what have you got for us? Hi.
Well, I think that talking is out of fashion now. It's time to have some action about it. Unleash the police, track down the people who have committed offences, put them behind bars. It'll be a deterrent to future ones as well. Yeah. And people can begin to feel safer in the country. I'm appalled that the level of fear in Britain with criminals and assaulters, assault persons, both knife crime, sexual assault, it's out of hand, and it can only be handled by the police arresting people.
Yeah. So we need more action in that respect. Of course, the police will always say, well, their hands are somewhat tied.
Well, it's time to release them, isn't it?
Yeah.
The thing is, we've got a police force. We've got lots of things. We don't use them because of our lily-livered politicians.
I think it is that. And why is there not, you want to hear a bit of outrage from Starmer and Phillips on this one. And thank you, Dave, for making that point. It's a succinct and it sounds like an obvious point, but it's true, isn't it? This whole story, the more you stand back and take a look at it, the bigger the picture becomes. And your jaw just drops a little more each time. How nothing was done. And I mentioned that big list of areas from Blackburn to Barking, from Peterborough to Rochdale, from Rotherham to Ipswich, where industrial-scale abuse of young girls was taking place. How many of those perpetrators are in jail? Probably a handful. Ever served a prison sentence on this? How many other victims are there? And is this still going on? And you note the smart money says it is. And one of the reasons it will still be going on is because those responsible felt like they kind of got away with it. Because the authorities, the local council, wanted nothing to do with this. Young girls systematically abused and raped want nothing to do with it. Social workers, areas of the police, politicians, councillors, nothing to see here. Keep quiet, young lady. You know it's for the best. We think you probably consented anyway. And come on, you'd had a drink. Yeah, but I'm 11. This is what we're dealing with. It is utterly gobsmacking. More calls from you on the way. We'll first take some headlines here on Talk at 2 o'clock.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile. The home of common sense. This is Talk.
3 minutes after 2 o'clock. Yes, welcome back. This is the home of common sense. Coming up this hour, as you've been hearing, Elon Musk labelling the safeguarding minister Jess Phillips as a rape genocide apologist after her decision to reject an Oldham grooming gang inquiry. I mean, wow, that in itself is a story. But the nuts and bolts of what this refers to, of course, is not a point of tittle-tattle. It is a very serious issue as to whether there should be a specific inquiry into grooming gangs. We'll take more of your calls on that. Also this afternoon, more research, new research says Britain is leaning towards populism because poorer people aren't voting. Backing Labour's plans to let 16-year-olds and foreign nationals have the vote. How'd you feel about that? 16-year-olds, you hardly know what an ear roll is when you're 16, let alone go to the ballot box. We'll have thoughts on that as well a little later. And an Albanian convicted burglar who cannot be deported has taunted the Home Office by posting a Happy New Year message from a London nightclub. I mean, you genuinely can't make this kind of nonsense up, right? I know there's a bit of a cliche there, but you really can't. 0344 499 1000. That is where you will find us. Here's an interesting one, which I agree with totally, from Peter, who says, Ian, I'm getting the impression that Elon, as in Musk, Reform UK, as in the party, and Nigel, as in Farage, and Donald, as in the next president, are now executing a plan to bring down Starmer as soon as possible. Do you know what? That would have sounded like a conspiracy theory, wouldn't it, a little while back? But you do, when I look at the stuff that Elon Musk has got involved in, I'm thinking, look, I know this is a bright guy, but he doesn't know anything about these people. Never heard of Jess Phillips in a million light years. Wouldn't know the ramifications, the ins and outs of this particular story. But his voice is very powerful. So the fact that he just drops in these little moments with increasing regularity, I think it's fair to say, it does lead you to think, is this sort of slightly more orchestrated? I don't think he's going to bring down the Labour government, by the way. I also don't think his interventions are particularly helpful, but, it's a democracy, and you often conclude, in the absence of someone else saying it, why not have a multi-billionaire with a massive profile who's likely to be part of the next American administration? If he has to raise it to put this back on the table, then maybe not a bad thing. Or is it? We'll take some comments on that as well, if you fancy. Let's talk to Tatton Spiller, founder of Simply Politics, a man who I'm not aware Elon Musk has ever tweeted about yet, Tatton, but of course, who knows?
Not yet, no, but it is only Friday.
It is only Friday. I think the weekend could be ripe with with these moments. I mean, just on that point, because it is rather fascinating. I mean, this is very unique territory for all of us. It's only sort of facilitated by the conduit of social media and the sort of the global world we live in, the internet, the digital space, etc. It's game-changing, and, we would never have imagined that someone who's going to have a bit part in the next American administration would be causing and making massive news headlines in this country over his views on a specific issue, in this case, the lack of an inquiry into grooming gangs. I mean, that in itself is a story.
It's a massive story, and this is a man who wants Jess Phillips in prison and Tommy Robinson released from prison.
Yeah.
That's not a set of values that is shared widely in this country. And it's just pure bullying. Using your massive status to call someone, accuse someone of wanting rape genocide, or whatever the actual words he used were.
Yeah. He's
bullying behaviour.
Accused her of being an apologist for rape genocide. So that's pretty big. That's significant, right?
I mean, it is significant. But if you look at the story, Jess Phillips has said Oldham Council themselves should run the review, like what happened in Rotherham, like what happened in Telford, like what a Conservative minister suggested should happen just 6 months ago, or maybe a year, whatever. This is not new. This is a standard way of doing things and has been successful. So for Elon Musk to jump in at this point over this story is remarkable.
It's interesting, and you're absolutely right, and I've made this point consistently over the last couple of days that, you know, this predates Jess Phillips or the Labour government. The Conservative, you do realise the poor prince of civil servants when you see these kind of stories, because that has been exactly the same response. I suppose what makes this slightly different is that half an hour ago Jess Phillips was saying there should be inquiries into this stuff when in opposition.
Well, I think you certainly get to see more of what's going on. And maybe it is a civil service. Maybe the civil service who are just... We have disagreed on the worth of the civil service before, you and I, but the civil service know their areas. And if they say, well, actually, Jess, I know what you said in opposition, but we have a really good record of local authorities running these reviews, then it's not disingenuous for her to change her mind.
But would that not be better than if she came out and said, look, I know, you know, I previously said this. You know, I know Jess Phillips a little bit because she used to come on a very regular basis when we were sort of talkTV and working from the other studio, etc. And I don't dispute that, you know, and she stands up in Parliament and she gives a yearly, you know, she reads out that very grim list of women who have died at the hands of people committing acts of domestic violence and sexual violence against women. She's being so linked to that narrative that it does seem rather peculiar that she is now taking the very opposite view to the one she had. Would it not be better for her to maybe clarify and say, OK, look, I know what you're thinking. I called for an inquiry. Now I've been able to look at the books because I actually have the job as a minister. Now I can see why it's probably better at a local level.
100%. That's what would be better. That's what I'd like to see. I'd like to see mea culpa even. This isn't what I wanted it to be. But this is the minutiae of this story. This is where it is. She said something, then she changed her mind, but she's still not refusing an inquiry or a review. She's saying that it just should be done by Oldham. That's the nuance of it. And then we get this blunderbuss from over in America.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense to me.
It is curious, and we just read out a second ago a tweet from somebody who wondered whether there was some sort of orchestrated script going on here between Musk and maybe Farage and maybe Reform and maybe Trump. I doubt whether Trump's involved, but it does feel that, you know, the fact that you know that half an hour ago Elon Musk had never heard of Jess Phillips. He doesn't know anything about this story, not really. He doesn't know the intricacies. He wouldn't know that Baroness J had a 7-year inquiry into this stuff already. He'd know none of that, and yet sees fit to tweet something, you know, whatever way you slice it, as shocking as that. Even if you agree with it, it's still shocking.
It's really, really strange, the strength of the language that he used. But I think there's, Nigel Farage is going to have an Elon Musk problem, because Elon Musk is calling for the release of Tommy Robinson. And Nigel Farage has frequently said how proud he has been to see off the BNP, to see off the right-wingers from UKIP and then Reform.
Yeah.
And he doesn't want anything to do with the English Defence League, which I understand no longer exists. But if his friend Elon Musk is backing Tommy Robinson, that's problematic.
Indeed, and what's interesting about that, I mean, there's a couple of points. You're right, Reform have completely distanced themselves from Robinson and Associates. I think they refer to them as that lot or something like that, but it was very dismissive. But also, it should be said, because, you know, social media, doing what social media does, i.e. make stuff up. I mean, can I just clarify that Robinson is not in jail because of anything to do with this story of grooming gangs. He's in jail, like hundreds of other people in this country, for contempt of court. Now, we can argue and say contempt cases. I saw a lawyer write the other day, quite a sort of what you might call somebody who's not of the left. A lawyer was saying, we can argue about contempt cases being too long. They often are, because it's almost a crime against the crown, as it were, in some respects, because a court has decided and made a decision, and then you go against it and you challenge it, or you publicly say something that becomes either libelous or tricky or breaks the law, then you're in trouble. And that's why it's just nothing to do with gangs and grooming gangs, nothing at all to do with it. But the amount of people on social media that are making that correlation, I know he's previously, spoken out in that area, but he's not in jail for that reason at the moment. And we can argue whether he should be in jail, but the fact is that's not why he's in jail. And you're right, I think calling for his release, and again, I doubt whether Musk knows anything about the ins and outs of the story of Robinson. Regardless of that, Reform want nothing to do with Robinson, so that may well cause a problem. Maybe it'll just quietly go away.
I don't think much with Elon Musk quietly goes away.
Maybe not. Maybe not. Let's talk about this story. I reckon we're going to disagree on this one, because I think you'll quite support the idea of lowering the age of voting. But certainly there's some research been done that reveals a record number of renters and non-graduates abstaining from elections, contributing to Britain's populist shift, which we've just been touching upon some of that. Voter turnout is a problem. There's an issue around all sorts of areas, non-graduates not voting as much as graduates, etc. People from lower socio-economic backgrounds and the like. And one way that Labour might deal with this is to extend voting rights to 16 and 17-year-olds. And also the 1.5 million under-18s would be the largest change since the 1960s. Why would a 16-year-old have a vote, Tatton Spiller?
Because they are in school. And I'll tell you for why. One of the issues is that people are leaving school, aged 18, leaving school or education. They've never felt part of politics. It's always been something other people do. So you're surrounded by multi-generational disenfranchisement through for whatever reason. And if you're in school and you have teachers and you have political education, the message that voting is important and it is for you is a really clear one, and it's easy to get across. I would put polling stations in the schools. Now, I
would make the age of being able to vote 32. So, I mean, we're quite a way apart on this.
I would make the age to vote 11, so that everyone who starts from the time you start secondary school, every election you're voting. So by the time you leave, you're just used to voting. I would give prisoners the vote. Stop it.
Well, they tried that. David Cameron actually had a rare victory, didn't he, over the EU on this, I think.
Yeah. I think that telling people politics and voting isn't for them is a dangerous, lifelong problem. Now, I understand the prisons thing might not be for everyone, but we want engaged people. And when you have them a captive, quite literally a captive audience in prisons, when you have a captive audience, it changes things. But listen, I want to talk about this because the Electoral Commission are the people in charge of engaging young people and people who haven't been voting. And the Electoral Commission have commissioned me and Simple Politics to deliver some things to help get young people voting. Now, in this year's elections, you won't get 16-year-olds. That bill's not going to start yet. So we're talking about 18, 19, 20-year-olds who come from a family of people who don't vote and trying to reach them.
Yeah. And that's good. I like that. I mean, I think it's... I'm staggered when I see the turnout at some elections, and the last general election, where there was a real feel that it was going to be the very opposite. There'd be a big turnout because there was so much disquiet with the Tories, and, Reform UK had suddenly pitched up on the scene. The Green Party were making inroads that previously for them had seemed unthinkable. It looked like there was so much more to play for. back in July, and that we'd see this sort of record turnout. And we had a really low turnout for this.
29 million people voted in a country of 68 million people. Now, lots of them are children.
That includes babies, of course.
It includes... I'd give babies a vote. It includes all kinds of people. But 68 million people, 30 million voted, 10 million voted for Labour. So Labour had this whopping great majority with 10 million votes. And what this study was saying, is talking about the rise of populism, is that you don't need to get all that many votes to break into government. But our electoral system means that's not quite true, because we don't have coalition government. So what Reform got 4 million votes, I think.
Yep.
And they've got 5 MPs. Whereas the Labour Party got 10 million votes and have 400 MPs.
Yeah. It's a strange old system. It's knackered, Tatton. It's knackered. Tell that to the Electoral Commission in the report. That's what I'd like to say. Listen, Tatton, always a pleasure. Thank you. Tatton Spiller, founder of Simple Politics, with us here on the programme. Joseph says Tommy is in prison because he exposes grooming gangs, so any excuse to lock him up is the reason. That's not why he's in prison, by the way. He's in prison for contempt of court. Nothing to do with grooming gangs. He's in prison for contempt of court, like many others are in prison in this country for contempt of court. It's an incredibly serious situation. If you ask me, should he be in prison, I would say, well, there's probably a good argument as to why contempt of court carries a prison sentence. I don't think it should be that long, by the way. I mean, you can serve like 6 weeks in jail for what I would consider to be greater offences. So, no, I don't think he should be there, but not for that reason. I think it should, because the length of sentence handed out in contempt cases is massive, and your ability to appeal and come out in a shorter period of time is exactly in the same space as, you know, people who've committed horrendous criminal acts. You don't get any dispensation for saying, look, it's a non-violent kind of crime, etc. But that's always been the case. There's always been debates about contempt cases. 0344 499 1000 is where you will find us. This is Talk.
You buy into our system, you buy into our values, our culture, our fantastic liberal approach to life, and you accept what it means to be British.
So does that mean then? Does that mean? Okay, fine. Fine. Hang on a second. I need to ask you. So, if that is the case, does that mean that, for example, anybody of, say, black Afro-Caribbean background, does that mean that people cannot or should not be referred to it? I mean, for example, should we be even naming tube lines the Windrush line?
No, I don't think we should. I think everyone should be treated equally.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
This one in from Mark in Southampton. Was it not Oldham Council that was part of the cover-up, Ian? Why the hell would you let them mark their own homework? Well, that's a very good point. Oldham Council was Labour-run when they wouldn't hold an inquiry. They wouldn't even ask the government to do anything. Essentially, they kept quiet about it. And then, as I understand it, and I stand to be corrected on the finer detail, the various bods in the council, or the councillors that were standing in the way of this, have now gone, and a new administration has said, actually, you know, we're going to go to the government and say we think there should be an inquiry into this. So yes, but it was, I mean, the last lot, I mean, who would refuse some sort of an inquiry, even if it wasn't like on the scale of one of the kind of, like the post office, at a local level? What council would say, you know, when you've got, I mean, Rotherham being the obvious example, when you've got in one area 1,400 children, one council, 1,400 children sexually abused. They're the ones that we know of between 97 and 2013. Wouldn't you immediately say, right, we need to absolutely get to the bottom of this? But of course the girls concerned faced not just a wall of silence, but were essentially told by various strands of the establishment to shut up. And it was probably your fault anyway. I mean, if you have a drink with 5 older men, you know, what do you think's going to happen? That was the spirit of what these girls went through. Completely exploited, and then subsequently, when looking for justice, completely and utterly ignored. Simon is in Basingstoke on this story. What have you got, Simon? Hi.
Yeah, hi, Ian. Well, I mean, I wonder how many places this has been going on that we don't know about. I used to live very close to the old Arsenal football ground.
Yep.
And I noticed there was always a lot of cars parked out of a particular building that kind of looked like a school but wasn't. And I actually asked the woman I was renting the flat from, asked her what the building was, and she said it was a care home for underage children. And I think that I may have actually seen this taking place and not even been aware of what it was. And I find it very hard to believe that this behaviour is only limited to Pakistani, Bangladeshi and Somali men in the north of England, or in Bristol, or in Oxford, and is not occurring in London. And I have to admit, I don't have a terribly high opinion of the mayor. I think if we want something to happen about this, Reform needs to come out and commit that if they win the next election, they will introduce a retroactive law that will make any hiding of these incidents or an active efforts to force people not to report it a crime. And then these people, and that should not just be limited to politicians, that should include social workers, the police, counsellors, and I would even include members of the press and also the numerous talking heads that we're seeing who are coming out and defending this. This is totally, if we as a society don't find this unacceptable, then we're finished. If you can't protect young girls, underage girls. What sort of society do we live in?
Yeah, and with, you know, it's not like there was a little bit of evidence that there was a problem. I mean, this is like industrial scale stuff. There was loads of evidence in so many different councils, and nobody, you know, prime ministers of the day, whether it was back in the 08-09 period, the Labour government, 14 years of Tory government, now the Labour government. How did somebody not join all of those dots, Simon, and say, I think we've got a problem here?
I think they have. I think one of the things that, and I think the point you've just made is an excellent one. The Tories cannot say a word about this.
No, they can't. They absolutely cannot say a word about this. They were doing the very same thing and kicking things into the long grass. They set up an inquiry that, you know, has had some, you know, there's been a little bit of positive result that has come from that, but it needs something much bigger and much more honest, right?
It does, but I think it goes further from that. I don't believe our political elites have a particular love of Islam. I think what they're really frightened of is the fact that if the truth about this and many other things came out, like the number of migrants living in social housing, the actual economic costs of mass migration, the British people who are fair-minded will look at them and blame them. And then, you know, people like Sir Keir Starmer, who your listeners may be interested to know, there had to be an act of parliament because his pension pot was so loud that if he continued and the government continued making contributions to it, he would have been taxed so heavily on it. They will lose their pensions, they will lose their prestige, and many of them will see the inside of a jail cell, which is what they richly deserve. So don't believe anything else. They are protecting themselves.
Yeah.
And that's something that we cannot allow.
Oh, and it happens in institutions, as we know, whether it's the church, whether it's government, whether it's local authorities. The same story plays out every time. Simon, great call. Thank you for that. This one comes in from Gary, referenced the comment about voting age. The last part of the human brain to fully develop, says Gary, is the prefrontal cortex, which doesn't happen until you reach your mid to late 20s. Interesting, that's the bit of your brain which is responsible for good decision making, which is why I tend to agree with you that people shouldn't be allowed to vote until they're at least 30, when they get best equipped to make good decisions. Plus, have got a bit of life experience which helps them understand how the world works. I mean, the latter, if nothing else, the latter point, it's got to be a line you draw, isn't there? There's lots of things you can't do at 16. You can have sex at 16. I don't think you can't get married, can you, without parental agreement? You can join the army, but you can't fight in the army. I think I'm right in saying at 16. There's loads of other stuff, and of course you're still at school at 16. I mean, it's way too young to be voted. I think the whole point of democracy and your right to vote should be treated seriously, and I think giving a vote to a 16-year-old doesn't take it seriously. I know I'd have thought probably different at 16, but, you know, when you get older, you get a little wiser, which is the point that Gary's made. Paul's in Newport on electoral reform. Paul, what do you think?
Hello, Ian. Well, firstly, my prefrontal cortex, I think, is well and truly developed. Let's tick that box to start with.
Well, we hope so.
You and I both.
Correct.
I'd be really, really radical. Okay, I would with reform. When I was saying to your colleague on the phone there, when I was a kiddie living at home, my father used to say, when you start paying rent, you can have a say on what goes on in this house. Okay, and I think we've all heard that.
Yep.
So if we accept that governments effectively collect taxes and then decide where they're going to go, and that's fundamentally what they do for 99% of the time, they do bugger all. Sorry about the language. They do very little about talk things, and then they decide where the money's going to go. So if I were king, if you ain't paying in, brother, you ain't getting a vote.
Yeah.
If we look back at the and it was the Labour Party, really, and I have no political bias at all, really, because I'm just so fed up with them all. But if you look back on it, the Labour Party bought the sort of government because they just kept putting up. Do you remember, in the 80s, it was who was going to pay the benefits to the most people. And all the people who got the most benefits voted for that party.
Sure.
And if you look at it, if you look at the benefits cost, every time we got anywhere near an election, it just jumped through the blooming roof. But if you're not paying in, why should you get a vote? So so some of us, and I'm one of them, okay?
Yeah.
I pay all my every tax. Every tax has to be paid. I'm just a citizen that says, yes, I own up to that. Here's that money. I own up to that. Here's that money. I don't have the savvy to know how to sort of jump between the hoops and get out of it. But why, if you're not paying in, why should you decide where it's going?
I think that's a fair point. And I think similarly, if you're a prisoner, you're also not paying in, but I think you've also, part of your loss of freedom is that you relinquish certain rights. And I think the right to a democratic vote would go hand in hand with serving time in jail, the loss of that right. Listen, Paul, thank you. Paul in Newport on electoral reform. Anything we talk about here, by the way, the lines are open either way. 0344 499 1000. 2:30, this is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
And looking forward to that. This from Brad in Cambridge. When I was 16, I would have voted for Ozzy Osbourne. I'd probably vote for Ozzy now, frankly. One here from Janice. Why are you putting it in the past tense when talking about grooming gangs? It's still going on. Well, we've acknowledged both. We're talking about the stuff that happened in the past, which is the story here. The fact that it's still going on is something that I think everybody can understand and get their head around, that given the ineptitude and the shortcomings of authorities, it is still going on. But the specifics of an inquiry is to talk about what's already happened. I hope that addresses the point. Jim says, good to have you back. Just seen that Elon Musk is suggesting that the king should dissolve Parliament. It's been done before in the 1800s. I just Googled it. I didn't know that, Jim. Thank you. Is that what he's suggesting? He's very involved. I think there can only be, as we said previously, I don't know, is there some kind of script at play here with Elon Musk? Is he just like, go on, Elon, here's another tweet. Can you send this one out for us? I don't know. Maybe Nigel Farage on that visit with Mr. Candy that he paid down there in Florida to Elon Musk is included a little bit of tweet favour. I don't know. I've no idea. But you do wonder. I mean, you could say it's entertaining in one respect. I think it's a bit... I thought look, I'm a fan of democracy. I'm a fan of honesty, I'd like to think. And I'm not a fan, necessarily, of, rich people who are going to form part of a new administration chipping in with kind of sort of half-baked ideas on things. But I'm a bigger fan of freedom of speech. So you know, let the boy do whatever he wants to do. But I think he's a bit skew-if on some of what he says. I mean, you've got to remember, it's only a couple of years ago. Everyone thought Elon Musk was just mad. But he's become a bit of a hero to some. I think he's great, by the way. He's not a hero. I don't want to look at these people like heroes. Superman's a hero, right? My dad was a hero. My granddad, etc. Not a billionaire bloke, privileged lifestyle, who's about to get even more privileged. That's not a hero. But I quite like him. This story as well that I said we would be covering too. The Albanian convicted burglar taunting the Home Office by posting New Year's celebration photos from a London nightclub. Despite being jailed and deported twice for burglaries, 28-year-old Dorian Pucker was seen smoking a shisha pipe and partying with a belly dancer. It comes as Sweden records its lowest number of asylum applicants since 1997, following a huge crackdown in the wake of spiralling gang crime. Let's speak with Kevin Saunders, former Border Force Chief Immigration Officer. Afternoon to you, Kevin.
Good afternoon, Ian.
Always good to have you. Well, I'm sure over the years you probably spotted many of these kind of stories where you thought, hang on a second, you know, we're meant to be controlling immigration. What the heck is going on here?
Well, that's a very good question. I don't understand the Albanian at all. Twice convicted, twice removed, and he's back again.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know how he's managed that, because once he's out of the country, when he shows up at a port and his passport is swiped, it would come up that he's been removed. So I have no idea how he could have come in, unless he's come in a boat.
Yeah, and you would have thought he's taken a bit of a risk, you know, by publicly, you know, putting himself out there, because if someone is trying that, they tend to try and lead a bit of an anonymous lifestyle, you might think.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's silly, really, really silly to do what he's done. He must either have a very good lawyer or something else on his side. I mean, I don't know if he's married.
Yeah.
That possibly might make a difference in country, but it wouldn't at the port of entry. I mean, we would have people like this arrive who have been removed, and they were burglars or criminals, basically.
Yeah.
And we would say, no, you're not coming in. It's quite simple. You are non-conducive to the public good.
Yeah.
Nice phrase, but then you'll refuse them.
And I mean, we seem to be seeing a lot of this at the moment where people can't be deported for, I mean, this guy could have been, and he was deported twice. We see the other side of that, Kevin, when, you know, the human rights lawyers kick in and you know, somebody who's done the most grotesque things and found themselves serving time in jail can't be deported because of their right to a family life.
Well, yes, this is a big problem. You find that people from abroad come here, commit all sorts of horrendous crimes, marry a Brit, and that's it. They think they're here for good because they're married. Therefore, a Human Rights Act kicks in.
Doesn't seem to take much, does it, to win one those cases if you're the person concerned? I mean, we're looking at the video of this fella now, you know, smoking his pipe and sort of sat in front of a fire-eating belly dancer. He seems to have succeeded somehow.
He certainly has. I would very much like to have his lawyer on my side.
Yeah, I mean, he's clearly got the best lawyer in the land if he's been allowed to stay here officially. But it's interesting, I mentioned the Sweden story. Sweden records its lowest number of asylum applications since 1997. Is there something you sense, Kevin, that maybe Sweden are doing that we should be doing?
Well, after I retired, I went up to Sweden and spent a little while there talking to the locals and what have you. Well, not all over the country, but a few places over the country. And I asked them about migration. I mean, mainly they all speak English, so it was easy for me. And said, you know, what is going on? Why is it that people don't want to come here?
Yeah.
And they said, oh, it's simple. It's the weather. It's the weather, and we are a very expensive country. And if you do come here, you have to pull your weight.
Yeah.
And people don't want to do it. Therefore, they don't want to go to Sweden. I think Sweden's figures are down to about 10,000, which is phenomenal when you look at the rest of Europe.
That's extraordinary. Yeah, it's a different set of rules once you hit Sweden, it seems. Listen, Kevin, thank you as ever. Kevin Saunders, former Border Force Chief Immigration Officer. I keep saying this when people scratch their head and say, how did Donald Trump win so convincingly that he's going to find himself back in the White House in, 3 weeks' time? In 17 days, he becomes the next president for the second time. Well, it's because of stuff like this. And, why have Reform found their star rising? And, man alive, it has risen. And if you look at the headlines that Reform generate, and I don't just mean the stuff they might generate themselves by, popping something on social media. Rupert Lowe is a great example. He's been asking some really searching and very simple, in fact, questions about specifically, not just specifically this area, but this area and others, immigration and the like, in the House of Commons. It's politicians speaking the language that everybody else does. I know you've got a few daft metropolitan elites that don't speak that language, the sort of Starmers of this world, and the Sadiq Khans don't speak that language. And I'm talking about common sense. I'm not talking about anything that's like a matter of massive, you wouldn't think would be a matter of massive divide when it comes to opinion. It's not stuff that should be a matter of left wing or right wing, just common sense. This is nonsense. We don't want this mumbo jumbo. We don't want this kind of, there's a guy who's been deported twice. He's still here. There's a fella that's done time in jail for rape, and he's allowed to stay because of a human rights lawyer that says he's got a right to a family life. It's that kind of stuff. That's the problem. Now, the truth will be in the next 4 years over there in the United States. How much does Donald Trump really achieve when it comes to this? If you listen to the mood music around Trump and those around him, you'd think that anyone who, treads that path of wokery or ridiculousness or has committed an offence when they've come from another country will be out on their ear, whether they work for a school, an establishment, the border force, whatever. They're all going to be... I don't think it's going to be as straightforward as that. I think Trump's going to come up against the same problems. And bear in mind, their lawyers have got real teeth out there. We talk about our left-wing lawyers. You wait till you see those guys over there. They'll kick something into the long grass for about 7 decades. That's how good these fellas are. So he's going to have a problem, but it's that mood music that I think is what got Trump to where he is. Plus the fact that he was up against a man with the mental capacity of a lobotomised chimpanzee. That sort of helped him along as well. This is Stacey in Manchester, going back to the rape gangs that we've been discussing. Stacey, what are your thoughts on this?
Hiya, Ian. Nice to speak to you.
You too.
So I listen to talk, I listen to talk all the time, but all day yesterday we was on about these gangs.
Yeah.
So obviously the bottom of the pit that's not doing anything is Labour, as I've known listening to you.
Yep.
Then obviously the police and then the councillors. So, and everyone's seeming to turn to politicians to solve the problem. My opinion is, obviously, after all these people haven't worked, so we've obviously got a war going on in our own country, is we should turn to the armed forces. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've got trained men in England waiting to go to war when there is a war already here. And if not the armed forces, do as Margaret Thatcher said, send in the boys, SAS. They only need to do 2 towns and 2 nights, yeah? And then they'll have them looking over the shoulders in every town, in every country of England.
And the very opposite happened, though, didn't it, sadly, Stacey? These people didn't need to look over their shoulders because they got away with it.
I know, but we're talking about what's going to be our next step now.
Yeah.
Now, no politician, Elon, whatever his name is, yeah, he's got money, let's face it. Money ain't going to solve this.
Yeah.
Like, you need to get to the nitty-gritty, get in there, send in the boys, just surprise them. I know the police are in, but
I know what you're saying. I know what you're saying. Sadly, what you and I would like doesn't seem to be the same thing as politicians like, Stacey.
I know. Well, obviously, after thinking about this, I sat and thought about it and thought, right, get in the army. I was angry.
Yeah.
So then I thought, who would be the person to send in the army would be Keir Starmer. Now, he hasn't got the balls to run England in the first place or sending anybody anywhere. It'd be down to him. So at the end of the day, that route wouldn't come off. But, you know, I think it would be a good route, you know.
Yeah. No, I get it.
Just another idea.
Listen, we need ideas, Stay. We need people to think outside the box. We've been in the box for decades in this country. That's why things have failed, because nobody thought, let's maybe adjust the way we consider or debate stuff. And people have gone through this sort of template way of running the country, which is no longer fit for purpose. Stacey, great call. Thank you very much indeed for that. Mark says, did Obama not stick his nose into UK politics over Brexit? He did. And look how we howled and condemned him for that. But I could see the context of a world leader making a political comment about an ally. I could see the context of it. I thought it was a pretty rotten trick to get Obama involved in the Brexit debate. But there was a context, OK? If Obama had just suddenly made a Facebook video saying, you know, Nigel Farage should be in jail, I would find that deeply disturbing. And I find it odd that Elon Musk would do something like that. It's deeply disturbing. One's a businessman, one was a president, of course. But I also agree with, you know, freedom of speech. When it comes to conventions, I suppose politicians follow a slightly different rule book. Mr. Musk only has to follow his own. He's a very powerful chap, right? But I thought it was interesting to see how it's going to go in terms of that relationship with Nigel Farage moving forward. 0344 499 1000. Voice of Doom is back. We think it's like day 8 or something. Maybe even more. I think it was the 18th of December we first played this voice. Didn't get a winner. We've been off for a bit of Christmas, so I think this is about the 8th day or something like that, 7th or 8th, that it hasn't got. Will it go today? Will it go today? Find out, if you haven't heard it, who the voice is, and will we get somebody to identify the mystery political voice? Coming next.
You buy into our system, you buy into our values, our culture, our fantastic liberal approach to life, and you accept what it means to be British.
So does that mean then? Does that mean? Okay, fine. Fine. Hang on a second. I need to ask you. So, if that is the case, does that mean that, for example, anybody of, say, black Afro-Caribbean background, does that mean that people cannot or should not be referred to it? I mean, for example, should we be even naming tube lines the Windrush line?
No, I don't think we should. I think everyone should be treated equally.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
It is Talk, just gone 10 to 3. So, Voice of Doom. It's the political mystery voice. We do this every day around about this time. This is, I think, it's actually day 6 we've just established. So it's the 6th day. Nobody has got it so far. Remember, don't phone in because there ain't no prize. But you can message in if you fancy taking part. If we get the right answer inside the next 10 minutes or so, we'll announce who it is. If not, it rolls over to Monday. So here's the voice that has so far scuppered the nation.
I believe that so strongly.
Who is that? 87222 if you want a message. Don't call, no prize. Have another listen.
I believe that so strongly.
What's interesting about the mystery, when we pick these, there's a huge, it's called the Voice Committee that we have here at Talk Towers. We all sit around a big oak table debating the voice that was going to absolutely grip the nation that nobody will get. And every time we come up with one, somebody gets it, often on day one as well. And when we had Gerhard Schröder, the former German Chancellor, the other week, though no one's going to get that, are they? I mean, it could be a random German. You might take a punt and go, well, it's a political mystery voice, so mate. And it went on like day 2. Schröder was in the bag, sorted. So I had every belief that this would last a couple of days, this one. But so far, no one has got close. Have another listen.
I believe that so strongly.
87222. If we get a right answer in about the next 10 minutes or so, we will reveal all on the other side of the news. If not, it rolls over to tomorrow. No, not tomorrow. It's not. I didn't make that mistake 2 minutes ago. Rolls over to Monday because we're all confused about it. You know, we're going out tonight for a Christmas party. Our team. Well, Amy's coming, so I say team. Sort of the matriarch of the piece, I think we could say. We're looking forward to that. So Monday it returns. Monday it's back. Will we get a winner? We'll find out in about 10 minutes' time. Let's go back to your calls. Hazel is in Hampshire. On the issue of immigration, Hazel, how are you doing?
Yes, hello, I'm all right. It's the others.
Yeah, of course it is. Of course it is.
No, I'm thinking about these excuse that these people are using, that they have a right to a family life, so they have to stay here. What's stopping them taking their family with them? I mean, you know, it doesn't
It's a very
make
good point.
sense,
Yeah,
does it?
it's a very good point. I mean, it's extraordinary, isn't it? These are just lawyers that are using, you know, this line, right to a family life, and hoping that a judge will look at it and go, OK, you've committed a terrible crime, but your children haven't, so therefore, you know, family life kind of usurps anything.
Well, it trumps it, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. Well, I mean, but it's nonsense. You know, if you've committed a terrible act and you don't come from this place, then after you finish your prison sentence, you should go back. In fact, I'd probably kick you out before your prison sentence.
But it should be a warning to the white girls who marry an immigrant. You have to ask yourself, is he only marrying her as a way of staying here? And you should tell her that if he makes a mistake or he gets into trouble, that if he gets deported and he wants to use you as a reason to stay, you can go with him. That might stop these silly girls marrying them.
Well, there are cases such as that. You're absolutely right. We will watch with interest. Hazel, thank you very much indeed for that. One here, no name given, says UK politicians feel free to comment on US politics, then they can't moan when an influential American figure chips in with comments on the UK. I believe it's called free speech. I don't think it is. I mean, that's ultimately where I end up on this one, is that it is free speech. And I know there's, you know, responsibility with free speech. I suppose there's such, you know, free speech can be offensive, and that's fine too. It can be libelous, that's not so fine. It can be threatening, that's definitely not so fine. So you've got these tiers, and I get, freedom of speech comes with responsibility as well. I don't think there's anything wrong per se with people commenting on other people. It happens all the time. If you get an MP on the news tonight, they'll ask you what you think of, German elections and who you'd like to win. Most of them will go, well, it's not for me to say who's going to win, but Germany needs stability and they need a change. They might say that. No one's complaining that a foreign voice comments. I think it's the nature and the kind of lack of any sort of context from a powerful voice that has disturbed some people. I don't know if that's the right word. I'm not disturbed by it. I'm sort of slightly surprised by the Musk stuff. The strength of what he said, I think, is, borderline tricky. But he owns the platform, and free speech, as that last texter said, reigns supreme. Let's go to Richard down in London, back to that issue of rape gangs and the lack of action over what's happening there. Richard, what are your thoughts? Afternoon.
Hi. I think the thing that occurs to me is this is actually the most serious and I think the most horrifying scandal we've seen in Britain since the last war. Because we're talking about tens, perhaps hundreds of thousands of people being vulnerable young ladies or children being murdered. I'm sorry. Sorry, just a bit of a problem on getting out of the station. Hundreds of thousands, possibly. I think what's really sickening about it is that King Charles, in his broadcast said, diversity is one of our strengths. Actually, I think we need the freedom to say, no, it's simply not.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a lot of evidence to say that that's a rather stupid thing to say when someone says diversity is our strength. I mean, it might be. There might be great examples of it. Of course we know there are. But that doesn't mean to say that it's an automatic show of strength just because you are diverse, which is the mistake that not only the King has made, but Sadiq Khan continues to make. He's got a PhD in this kind of old guff. Can't stop himself. Richard, your phone line, sadly, has slightly got the better of us, which is timely because we're about to hit the news. We've got the voice of doom. Will we get an answer on the other side of the news? Here's the voice.
I believe that so strongly.
Who believes that so strongly? Who is that? 87222, you can message us. Lots to come in the next section, including tech, because it's a Friday. First, though, 3 o'clock. Let's get the latest news headlines.
across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
It is Talk 3 minutes after 3 o'clock. We're talking what is happening across the pond and in connection with what is happening over here. Elon Musk keeps dipping his toe into domestic matters. It's quite interesting to watch at one level. What do you feel about this? He's labelled the Safeguarding Minister, Jess Phillips, as a rape genocide apologist after her decision to reject an Oldham grooming gang inquiry. That's what he said. Thoughts on that and the wider issue of whether we need a very specific inquiry that only deals with these areas. There has been, of course, an extensive inquiry, but it was slightly wider in its brief. Also this afternoon, new research says Britain is leaning towards populism because poorer people aren't voting, backing Labour's plan to let 16-year-olds and foreign nationals have the vote. How do you feel about that? And in tech news, former Deputy Prime Minister Nick Clegg has announced he'll leave his role as the Facebook owner Meta after more than 6 years and a reported salary of more than £10 million, just weeks before Donald Trump returns to power. We'll talk to Will Guyatt, our tech correspondent, on what actually is going on over there at the Facebook. Details on the way. 5 minutes after 3 o'clock, this is Talk. This comes in from Robin in Dorset. They don't want to hear the truth from people like Maggie Oliver, which is why non-crime hate offences were invented. If the government can scare people into keeping quiet, they can continue to kick the can down the road. And that is one of the problems. I didn't really consider this a little earlier when we were talking about whether there should be an inquiry. A very specific inquiry into those towns. And of course, the instinctive answer is, well, yeah, of course there should be. And it was pointed out by a lawyer to us a little earlier that one of the problems with that is that you risk proposed laws and measures not being implemented by kicking it down the road again. I mean, the Baroness J inquiry took 7 years. 7 years to get this thing to see the light of day. It reported back, I think, in October 2022, started in 2015. And there were lots of recommendations in that. They need to be put into action. And if you have another inquiry, they probably won't be put into action for another 7 years because we'll be busy having another inquiry. So the word inquiry is quite seductive, but it doesn't always do what we want it to do. We want action, I think, is maybe the best way of looking at it. Now, the voice of doom. Before the news, we played you this voice.
I believe that so strongly.
It's the 6th day. We've not had an answer correct so far. Has it changed today? Well, these are some of the wrong... Can we hear the voice again, Amy?
I believe that so strongly.
So these are some of the wrong answers. Michael Howard, no. Tony Blair, no. Jeremy Corbyn, Zach Goldsmith, Nick Clegg, just mentioned him, no, none of them. Neither is it Jack Straw or Nigel Lawson. It's not Dominic Cummings or Boris Johnson, not him either. In fact, yet again, no one has got the right answer, which means it returns on Monday for the 7th day. I'm really surprised, given how good our audience have been in terms of spotting what we think are fairly cryptic voices. This one's languished for now 7 days. It's back on Monday. Stand by. And also this story this afternoon at 6 minutes after 3. New research claims that Britain is heading towards populism due to more renters and non-graduates staying at home during election time. The gap in voter turnout between graduates and non-graduates has more than doubled since 2019. That only feels like 20 minutes ago. This is according to the Institute for Public Policy Research. The think tank suggests that democratic reforms, including giving foreign nationals the right to vote and holding elections on weekends, with Labour planning to extend voting rights for 16 and 17-year-olds, might do the trick. Let's speak to the author and sociologist Frank Furedi. Frank, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
I mean, it seems to me that if you do all of those things, it doesn't really do the trick. It just sort of almost gerrymanders something into place rather than what I thought the initiative should be, is to get more people interested in democracy.
Well, you know, this report is so flawed in every respect because all the evidence shows that whenever populists do well in an election, like in America or in Germany, Italy, places like that, the number of people who are voting, the proportion of the electorate that votes actually rises. So look at the high numbers of people that turned out for Trump, the high numbers that have recently voted in Europe. What it indicates to me is that whenever people feel strongly about something and want to vote for an alternative, they will come out and vote. The reason why so many people stayed at home in the last general election in Britain was because they were not inspired by any of the political parties.
Yeah.
They weren't inspired by the Conservatives or Labour or the Lib Dems. And what we have at the moment, and this is the big secret, is a gradual process of de-alignment, where people's connection with political parties has become weaker and weaker. They no longer take them very seriously. And it's in this context that populist parties can actually flourish, which is what the report is all about, because what they're worried about is reform benefiting from what's happening at the moment.
And of course, you know, reform managed to hoover up 4 million votes, which is significant stuff. And the smart money, Frank, says they will continue in that direction.
Yes, and not only that, where the report is also wrong is assuming that young people will vote for the Labour Party or vote for the left.
Yeah.
If you look at the recent patterns of elections in Europe, an interesting thing has evolved, which is that for the first time since the 1960s, instead of tending to move towards the left, which is what young people have tended to do, more and more young people are voting for the right or for populist parties. It's a kind of new counterculture where they basically are saying that we have enough of the old establishment. You know, we're going to shake things up a little bit. And that's why in Holland, in Sweden, in Italy, Germany, you have such a high proportion of young people voting for populist parties. And I think that's something that this report doesn't really grasp and understand, that we now live in a different world than the post-1960s generation.
If Labour go through with all of this, and it looks as if they will do, so you extend voting rights to 16 and 17-year-olds, you give foreign nationals the right to vote, then, I mean, there is an argument that says Labour are home and dry, right? I mean, that's a fairly significant amount of people that would be included in just those two groups who are likely to then vote Labour.
Yeah, I think there's as you were suggesting, there's an explicit attempt to gerrymander and to change the electoral system so that you limit the influence of the middle-aged and the older generation, which tends to be more conservative, and somehow create a greater space for young people. But I think that this can backfire for the reasons that I've suggested, that in many parts of Europe, the young are rebelling against the old establishment, against the cultural elites as they now exist. You have that in the United States even, where a lot of young people voted for Trump rather than for the Democrats. So it's not so black and white. I think the really insidious aspect of this is you break down the distinction between citizens and non-citizen. So you no longer have a special status for being a British citizen. You become just like anybody who is living in France or the United States or India. Everybody's the same. Everybody's got the same responsibilities, even though these individuals have not played a role in building British society. They have not paid their taxes over the decades. They weren't part of a community here, but somehow they've parachuted in, and they've given exactly the same rights as somebody who's been living here all their life. I think that erosion of citizenship is a fundamental attack on democratic rights and democratic decision-making.
What do you think, Frank, just on the wider issue of people's political appetites or concerns changing? And I think you're correct in identifying that, you know, there is certainly a sense, whereas young people once upon a time, you know, if you're young, you vote left, if you're a bit older, you vote right, etc. And that's all been slightly muddled in the last few years. What do you think is behind that? I mean, the short answer is woke culture. The second answer, I suppose, alongside that would be immigration. That they'd be two big issues. Is it as simple as that, or is there something else going on?
I think those two issues are really important, but even more important, I think, is the loss of legitimacy of the mainstream parties of European societies. If you look at these parties, they've been around for decades and decades and decades. They had huge memberships. You look at the number of party members in the Conservative Party or the Labour Party, nothing like it used to be. And therefore, a vacuum has been created for parties that can speak the language of everyday life, who can connect with the problems of people, who understand that there are a lot of young people who are really disturbed by the fact that their communities is somehow fragmenting and coming apart, who really resent not being able to be openly British, to fly the flag, to kind of feel proud about their country. And in other places in Europe, when people feel like that, they will move to the right. And that's why I think Holland is a very interesting example. It's a very liberal society, arguably more liberal than Britain is. And yet, the majority of young people under the age of 24, the largest sections of them voted for the Geert Wilders, the Populist, to the surprise of everybody. In Germany, the AfD gets a significant number of support from young people. So I think something very interesting is changing, and our traditional image of long-haired young people, sort of wanting to tear down the world and move towards the left is gradually coming unstuck, because that is no longer the kind of revolution that young people want to be part of. They want to almost declare their fascination with their own nation, their own way of life. They're trying to find their place in the world, and they're reacting against the dominant cultural institutions everywhere in the West.
This is fascinating. I sense we'll speak again on this, Frank, and thank you for your time as ever. Frank Furedi, author and sociologist. I think this is a really interesting period to be in. I mean, there's some always areas of concerns when things, when we get seismic changes in things, and what you'd call the sort of legacy political parties of the Conservatives and Labour, a sense that you want something more. Now, I think that premise, if that's the title of the debate, deserves a lot of analysis. I don't think it's as simple as, well, they all say the same thing, you can't trust them. There's a lot of cliche in that, but there's also some truth. But I sense that the picture is a little more complex. I think there's lots of other things going on. Within that, you'd have to look at everything from the cost of living, you'd have to look at everything from batty, crazy laws, you'd have to look at everything around the issue of immigration. These issues which were seen as almost side dish points, they weren't, most people don't think about that, which is how the kind of Tories and Labour have got away with it for so long, because they haven't been issues that have had the right kind of publicity and profile and open debate in the same way, and different people joining the debate. You've got 38,000 people row across the channel, and that's not meant to be a point of concern. And again, I'm going to repeat it one more time. Doesn't matter whether you're left wing or right wing. That should be something that bothers the hell out of you. You should be thinking, what, really? They're doing that on an annual basis? 1,000 people over the Christmas 2 or 3 days got in a boat and came to... This is not... It's stuff like that. And that might sound like the most obvious thing, but I think there's more nuances in it. I think those are the kind of the engine room of the problem. I think there's general disquiet in lots of people's lives just about the cost of stuff. We know you can go Christmas shopping. Even if you can afford to buy something, you still note it. You still resent, but nobody wants to be ripped off, even if you've got a few quid. You look at stuff and think, really? That's what that costs just for that? This is insane. It's insanity. We went to, I mentioned this earlier, I know you can't really judge what stadiums charge for things as a measure of where life's gone wrong, but it's all relative, I suppose. We went to the O2 to watch this Disney on Ice thing. You get the kind of Toy Story people and Moana on a pair of ice skates singing the songs and doing stuff. It's quite entertaining. A bottle of water, a standard bottle of water, was £4.10p. £4.10p for what you would call a small bottle of water. We actually forgot, we had a rucksack with our own water in it, which we left at home by mistake, you know, trying to get 2 kids out of the house, I don't think it would have mattered because I don't think we would have been allowed in with them. So we had to buy one for £4. We shared a bottle of water, 4 of us. £4.10. Now, I'm a capitalist. I'm all for free enterprise. That is flipping criminal. And I didn't even, God knows what a portion of chips would have cost or any of that stuff. Look, I know these places don't make the money as obviously as you think. And I shudder to think what the energy bill is of running the O2. I get it, all right? There's a lot of overheads there. It's not like the village hall where they're putting on, you know, Blithe Spirit for a couple of days and, you know, a couple of the dads are making the scenery. It's big stuff. I understand that. £4.10 for water. I believe that headline is relevant to the disquiet in our lives, along with many others. Whatever it happens to be, it's all kind of welded in to this mishmash under the headline of the world is upside down. We're in an Alice in Wonderland kind of suspended reality. Something's not quite right. We're off our bearings. And I think people are feeling that. And then some politicians come along and they talk very openly in a different kind of way. They feel accessible. It feels like they're speaking your language. I'm talking about Trump. I'm talking about Farage. I'm talking about people like that. And listen, the left need to take note. And so do the Conservative Party. You really need to take note that times are changing. And we're fed up with people that sing from this kind of groupthink hymn sheet. People want change, real change. Herbie is in Harrow. Back to one of those issues where we didn't see enough change. We've been talking about these rape and grooming gangs. Herbie, what's your take on this? Afternoon to you.
Oh, good afternoon, Ian. Ian, you just said the world's upside down. It's been upside down for a long time, Ian. I mean to say, this is absolutely crazy. How can a minister take away the rights of these victims to have a proper hearing as to what went on? Where were the authorities, the police, the council? Where were they when these poor girls were being raped and abused by these men for 10 seconds of pleasure and giving them a lifetime of misery?
Yeah.
Where was it? What right as a minister got to do that, to take away those poor girls' right to get justice at last?
100%.
Hey, come on, Ian. This is absolutely lunacy. You know, you can't carry on like this. Look, if we carry on this way, there's going to be riots in the streets because I think people are saying, enough's enough. We've had enough. We can't carry on like this. This is absolutely stupidity and lunacy. Absolutely.
Spot on. Succinctly put, Herbie, as ever, with some passion in there too. Thank you, Herbie in Harrow. 0344 499 1000. Lots to get through. We're going to talk tech as well. We'll get to the bottom. By the way, the Nick Clegg leaving Facebook or Meta after about, I think it's been there about 7 years, is a really interesting story based on everything I've just been talking about, because oddly, it is connected to Donald Trump. Not in the way that, Nick Clegg don't like Trump, so he's leaving. Oh, no, it's a much bigger picture involving Zuckerberg, relationship with the White House, relationship with the former and now future president of the United States, which has not always been good. And, of course, you've got Elon Musk lurking around, who owns another big social network. There's more to that story. The nuts and bolts are fascinating. Will Guyot's going to join us in a little bit to tell us more on that. And, of course, your thoughts along the way as well. 0344 499 1000.
talking political spin here, but I just don't know yet. I mean, it's 4 years away, like you said, that's forever in politics. I would really like to rejoin the Labour Party. I'd like to recognise it as the Labour Party that I joined and have always been supportive of. But
because you think the Labour Party has left you rather than you having left it?
Yeah, that's how it feels. That's how a lot of my colleagues feel. You know, we don't recognise this as the Labour Party. You know, I get a lot of jibes online. Why doesn't she just join the Reform? That's not my politics at all. You know, Jeremy Corbyn's about as likely to join Reform as I am.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
It is Talk, 24 minutes after 3 o'clock. This from Brian. Jess Phillips should stand down immediately from her privileged position as an MP over the grooming gang scandal, and the PM, who was head of public prosecutions at the time, should also be investigated. Both are complicit in failing to prosecute those animals. The pathetic, two-faced, gutless government should hang their heads in shame. What on earth has happened to our country? Starmer's defence is that he was the one that did prosecute the Rotherham perpetrators, I understand it, but I would simply draw Mr Starmer's attention to a rather more extensive list of places like Blackburn, Sheffield, Manchester, Rotherham, Derby, Telford, Bradford, Ipswich, Birmingham, Barking, Peterborough, Nelson, Oldham. I mean, the list goes on. I don't think you can wiggle out of that one. I know the Crown prosecution thing is a fairly complex, you know, bag of worms when you start looking at prosecutions, and I think some of the time, some of those cases never even got to that stage because even the police didn't take any action. So I can see the problems, but yes, I'm all for having an investigation, as Brian says, into what the heck Starmer was doing at the time. Let's go to Matt in Cheshire. Happy New Year, Matt. How are you doing?
Hi, Happy New Year, Ian. I thought there was something wrong with the world yesterday. You didn't have a grey jacket on.
I didn't. What did I have yesterday? What was it? I was trying to... I had a black jacket. No, we actually talked about it. I think it's possibly the first time I've ever worn a black jacket, and I don't know why I did.
I just thought, wow.
I mean, I quite liked it, but I don't know. A very odd moment for me.
Yeah, the world's not the same when you've not got a grey jacket on, Ian.
Do you know what? I'm all about diversity. That's what it is.
I'm ringing about Musk, and I think he's doing excellent work, sort of exposing Labour, using the language that Labour have used themselves not long ago in opposition. Yeah. Strong, name-calling, vicious, spiteful language. This allows Reform to appear moderate, and Lee Anderson and Nigel Farage can more or less just tiptoe around looking parliamentary and not have to mention these things because he's doing it on their behalf.
That's a good point, actually. That is a good point. Do you think when he called Jess Phillips a rape genocide apologist, was that too strong? If I was sitting on a jury, I'd probably have to say, bit over the top, Elon. I mean, I'm not, you know, a Jess Phillips fan. She's done nothing different to her predecessor in the Tory party. But was that a little over the top? I don't want to, you know, look, it's about free speech ultimately.
Do you remember Banana Republic, racist, xenophobic, you know, sexist, Banana Republic, Angela Rayner at the...
Scum Tories, Tory scum.
Scum Tories, yeah. Kwasi Kwarteng is a superficial black.
But this, all of that. But this fella's about to have a role to play in the next American administration.
He's not an elected official.
No, he's not.
He's not held by those boundaries, is he?
That, indeed, and it's his position with Trump is, I think, a bit symbolic, isn't it, more than anything? But it's we've never seen anything like this, though, Matt, have we? That's what makes it, I suppose, interesting.
I'm calling it the Western Rescue Service.
Western Rescue, the WRS.
Yeah, they're going to save us and America from ourselves and our own appalling politicians.
Yeah.
And can I just say one more thing?
Yep.
Simon Danchuk said that he was told to keep quiet about this.
He did, yeah. We were supposed to speak to Simon today, but he was sadly not able to come on. He was up to something, but he did. He was one of many, but you're right. When he was a Labour MP, he was told by others, including other MPs, don't mention anything about ethnicity.
I don't think some people in the London media, not you, and they don't realise how repulsive some of these Labour elements are in the North and in Yorkshire and the North West. Some of these people are truly hideous, and anything is possible.
There also, you're absolutely spot on, there is also something about, and I did mention it to Matthew Larser, the first guy, former Labour advisor that we had on at the beginning. When it comes to issues of race, and do you remember Christopher Hitchens, Matt, the late, great Christopher Hitchens, brother of Peter, who spoke brilliantly on this stuff, and it's worth looking at. He was asked something on the lines of, why don't we hear more condemnation about, ISIS, for example, from the left? And he said rather simply, and I think, another great example is, Queers for Palestine. You've seen those characters, Matt, right? That you think, really, you're supporting this as a gay organisation is trying to come out alongside Hezbollah. That's a bit weird. The left can't go there. The left can't bring themselves, essentially, to have any condemnation of non-white people.
No, they're really sort of betwixt and between on a lot of these issues.
Yeah, they just can't. They can't do it.
Alistair Campbell, remember, lied about the death of hundreds of thousands of Iraqis and British soldiers. So a little bit of rape gang activity.
Yeah, he will say he never told a lie. He's not here to defend himself, but nonetheless, I hear what you're saying. That would be his defence. But yes, you're right. I mean, they don't struggle to carry on this kind of weird facade of, and it is sort of Kafkaesque, this weird facade of just simply not calling something obvious out, because it sort of challenges their core belief. Matt, thank you for that. We hit the clock. It does, and that's the problem. It kind of, you'd think if you were, for example, a gay person, you could not, surely in any way, understand the goings-on of certain Middle East regimes, even what are quite tame, legitimate governments whose track record, if you were female, you'd have a similar position. You'd think women's rights, how's it going down there in Saudi? Or you've got the World Cup, but, if you're female and you look the wrong direction, you'll find yourself doing 6 years. But the left they just can't go there. They can't condemn that because it's sort of counterintuitive to everything they stand for. Hang on, these are people that we stand up for, right? Because they're not white and they're from a distant country, and even those people that live in this country, that we just can't get animated about it. You don't hear the same level of animation if a Islamist terrorist drives a van into a crowd. You don't hear the likes of Owen Jones talk as loudly about that as you would if it's, I'm thinking Virginia, a alleged far-right person drives a vehicle into a crowd. You won't find an equivalence in the minds of these people because they just can't go there. And it's that old shizzle that the likes of Trump and Musk, and to a degree Reform UK, are sort of challenging this bonkers thinking, which is, its tentacles have taken hold of society as we know it. 0344 499 1000. We're going to talk about what is going on in America. Not Mr. Musk's social media, but Mr. Zuckerberg's social media. What's going on at Facebook, and why has Nick Clegg, remember him, our former Deputy Prime Minister, why has he been forced to walk the plank? And it could all be tied in with the Trump administration. Details coming next.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
It is Talk. 0344 499 1000. 25 to 4. Let's talk tech. Everybody's favourite technology journalist, Will Guyatt, is back with us. There's a lot to get through here, Will, and we're only day 3 of the year.
Happy New Year to you, Ian.
Yeah,
Season's greetings and all that still.
Absolutely. I love this story, so this is how I'm choosing to read it. Nick Clegg used to be our Deputy Prime Minister in the coalition. Then he lost his seat as an MP in Sheffield. He went to work at Facebook and their bigger company, Meta. And then, because they've got a lot of facilities there for staff, like a free sweet shop, he got caught stealing jelly beans, and Zuckerberg said, Nick, you've got to go. And that's the end of his career. Is that the story here, Will?
You're sounding more and more like Elon Musk and the type of tripe he's publishing to X every day. No, that's not quite true. But there probably is the suggestion that Mark Zuckerberg's recent visit to Mar-a-Lago played some role in Clegg looking to pursue new opportunities outside of Meta. Yep. So I think it's no exaggeration to say that they've put Joel Kaplan in to replace Nick Clegg, running kind of all the policy issues and the political stuff for Meta. Joel Kaplan, somebody I worked with many years ago, didn't get my humour, but I won't hold that against him, is a Republican.
Well, I don't get your humour either, Will. In fact, I'm struggling to recall any.
You've been stuck with me for many years too. He worked for George W. Bush, and it was in the George W. Bush administration. It's quite clear that there's been some kind of conversation with Donald Trump when Mark Zuckerberg was down there kissing the metaphorical ring at Mar-a-Lago, and there's been a change of people running the service. I think it's as simple as that. And let's not forget that there have been no conversations about how Meta platforms influenced the US election this time, because the platform intentionally stopped people seeing overtly political content during the election. They didn't play it up. They didn't do any of the things they'd previously done in the Trump
on either
previous
side,
election.
right?
On either side, no, they were neutral, and quite successfully neutral too. So I genuinely hope the platform isn't going to turn into some kind of right-facing sewer, which is essentially what's happened with X at the moment. And I'm not criticising that as being against my view or anything. I'm just saying that if you look at X at the moment and the tripe that's coming out on that platform, including the owner of the platform suggesting that the king should break up Parliament at the moment. The challenge you face, Mark Zuckerberg is a hard-working businessman who's built a successful company. Elon Musk is a hard-working insomniac who craves engagement. And the UK happens to be live and online most of the time when the rest of his population is asleep. Yeah. So he's basically goading this country now with all of the tripe that he's posting. I hope that doesn't happen with Meta's platforms.
Listen,
I hope it stays
I was
somewhat independent.
I was trying to find an equivalence to this, because I'm always stuck with these stories between, some of the stuff that Musk has tweeted. It's a bit off colour. I get that, but then I also think, well, free speech. He's allowed to say whatever he wants to. Charlie Mullins has been having a right old pot. There's another rich bloke. He's worth tens of millions. Old Charlie, former plumber, now lording it up down there on the Costa because he doesn't want to live here anymore because he can't stand this government. So, I mean, what's the difference?
Charlie Mullins spent much of his life here, knows an awful lot about the country, still has family here. Elon Musk has no real history with the UK. Is doing. But
does that mean he can't comment on it? He's not allowed to make daft comments, even if they're silly.
Why is he not commenting on the poor behaviour in China against Uyghur Muslims or the economies that are fueling the growth of his business? He's choosing to poke the UK for engagement. It's no different than posting some of the BS that he posts on the platform in the hope that a certain audience really gets to it. And the sad reality of this is he's focusing on the UK because of the number of absolute rabid, right-wing, right-focusing users of this platform. Now, I'm not even sure if I'm saying that as a criticism. He is appealing to an audience. He is appealing to an audience that has the same view as he does. Yeah. And there is a strong apparently growing number of those in the UK.
The weird thing is he never had those views once upon a time. He was a Democrat all his life. He was a guy that supported the Democrat Party.
They're fueling the growth of his platform. They're the only area of growth in X. This kind of group of people who are convinced that the whole world is a conspiracy, including those in the US who are suggesting that the drones are aliens and all sorts of other crap.
Oh, they are aliens. Come on. I mean, I know an alien when I see one. Will.
Yeah, but there is Elon Musk is trying to appeal to a certain audience. His site is nothing more than a glitzy version of truth.social now, the social network that Donald Trump tried to launch. It's no more than that, though. There's no critical thinking left on the platform. It's just bashing the view of the opposite party. Well, I'm just saying, I think a growing number of people, apart from those who love Elon Musk, are sick of it.
But listen, the great thing about free speech is you can say that. You can say it here. You could go onto Twitter or X and say it as well.
No, that's absolute BS. And I'm going to call you out on this.
What do you mean you can't go on and say it on Twitter? Of course you can.
No. You clearly don't understand how X works if you believe you have got the same even-handed level platform as Elon Musk and many of those far-right
I'm not saying we've got the same platform as Elon. He owns the damn thing, right?
No.
Yes, he does.
Yes, that behaviour is being given more precedence and more promotion on the platform.
No, I get that. I understand the algorithm.
So how do you have... No, so that therefore free speech is broken. If you say you've got free speech on that platform, it does not exist, because Elon Musk and the views that he supports will always be louder than whatever you can do. His
how have they done...
is larger than yours.
OK, he has got a bigger megaphone than me. I don't dispute that. But how does I know that, algorithms can be incredibly impressive, but how are they able to so efficiently reduce what would be seen as a critical comment of Musk as distinct from a positive one? I mean, there's not a bloke sitting there at night.
I can tell you.
Like Al, the security guard, used to, sitting there on the reception, trying to work out who said what.
He had the deepest voice of anybody I've ever heard in human existence, security guard. He was incredible.
Yeah.
But yes, there is somebody dialing up and down how the platform performs. Elon Musk has screamed at a dozen engineers before when one of his jokes hasn't performed on the platform. That has been proven. There is documentary evidence of that happening.
Okay.
And so it's simple. If people are the people who he supports, the accounts he is given prominence to, are being given favourable access, and their kind of reach on the platform is being boosted.
I hear it, and it's he would say it's his company,
not
do whatever.
Free speech.
Yeah, not free speech in that respect. Certainly not a news outlet. Don't anybody ever confuse any of social media with it being authentic news. Once in a while, there's a little scintilla of light, but these places, all of them, are cesspits of inaccuracy and misinformation. But hey, it's free speech. Let's talk porn, Will. I think we should move on. Why not? What's your fate? No. Let's talk about Pornhub, which is a well-known adult pornography site, but it's facing some scrutiny in the States. What's happening?
Yeah, Pornhub is now essentially blocked in 16 or 17 states in the US. And this is a big falling out over age verification and some of the methods that are being used in new laws in the US to prove people. I think it's 17 you have to be there. I'm not entirely familiar with the laws, but there is a fallout over the companies involved in selling legal porn on the internet, if you would, are suggesting that the verification methods are unfair, and a huge amount of data is actually being taken from users in order to attempt to verify age. This is something that's not going to go away, and we're going to hear a load more of this over the next few years, because you've got this situation slightly differently, but in Australia, where social media, under 16s are going to be stopped from using social media by the end of the year. Nobody actually has a decent solution to stop under 16s from not using social media. The age verification software they claim they're going to use doesn't exist, and age estimation is 60 to 70% accurate on a good day. So that means a huge chunk of under 16s are still going to be able to use those platforms. It's the same with the porn scenario. You cannot, unless you're using credit card detail or ID, actual ID, you are not going to know whether or not those people are over 18 or of age or not. It's a big challenge that the internet and tech companies are going to have to face over the next few years.
Yeah, absolutely. And I find it bewildering that when it comes to either social media, pornography, violent content, stuff that you really don't want 10-year-olds looking at, it seems extraordinary given the capabilities and the technological advancements and the stuff. Elon Musk can make a rocket take off and then go into reverse gear and reappear back up where it came from, and yet
governments don't want digital or state ID. That is the challenge, and arguably society doesn't want it too. That would be the way of solving it, is by having a form of ID. And I'm sure I'm getting tons and tons of talk viewers and listeners messaging me now and saying I'm part of the Soros conspiracy. But that would be the easiest way. That would be the easiest way to solve this particular problem.
George Soros's best friend, Elon Musk. There's a little factoid for you. Listen, we are going to take a short pause, Will. Stay with us. We will talk about Apple and the Siri lawsuit. Plus, what is next for tech in 2025? You won't believe what's around the corner. You think we've gone a long way so far with technology? Stand by for the details. Coming next.
US, thinking that kind of the jihadist threat is over, like, you know, the threat picture has moved on. But yeah, exactly as you say, this is a reminder that actually it hasn't, and it has still, whether it's kind of the old guard of Al-Qaeda who are kind of more loyal to bin Laden and want to attack the US for those reasons, or as looks possible in the case of New Orleans, there's kind of this cast of like outcast misfits and losers that ISIS is still actually able to inspire domestically. So there's kind of the two different elements of the threat there, but it still is a threat.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
It is 10 to 4. Peter Cardwell's here at 4 o'clock on Drive. We'll chat to Peter before then. Will Guyatt is still with us. We'll talk about what's next for tech in 2025. I mean, I don't think we've even touched the sides, Will, on where things like AI are going. We'll come to that in a moment. But first, Apple had to settle a lawsuit. I'm sure they can afford it, but what have they done wrong and what did it cost them?
Well, this is really, really interesting because what have they done wrong? Nothing, if you look at the settlement here, because they've not accepted responsibility, but they've settled out of court, which is very, very intriguing. And this is the suggestion that Apple Siri was listening to users, I think, before 2019. And somebody made a complaint suggesting her and her partner were talking about Air Jordan trainers, and they suddenly started targeting with loads of adverts. Now, Apple have always denied using this data and listening. The company has not responded to requests for comment following the out-of-court settlement of this class action. And the theory is they may have just settled this to make it go away before they had to say more in court. But currently they're saying they haven't done anything wrong. However, you and I know that companies typically probably don't go and settle something like this unless there's some truth in what's being told.
Well, hang on a second. I mean, Prince Andrew gave some money to somebody. He hadn't done anything wrong, but he's done. So, you know, maybe if you take that as a precedent, maybe Apple are just doing the same thing.
I am deeply intrigued by this story, though, given that all tech companies have denied that they're listening to you for your devices unless you use the trigger word to listen. Yeah. And there is a suggestion here that maybe before a certain date and with a certain group of customers, Apple may have been doing just that, listening to them. But unless you get more information or clarity on what they have settled for or not settled for, we're really not going to know. But this is actually a rare step for Apple, because normally they're pretty accurate and open and transparent on all of this kind of stuff. So but they haven't commented yet.
I mean, can I not say I was one of the people that it listened to and get some of the 95 million?
I think you're probably too late to do that now.
No, that's a bit grim, isn't it?
There's very limited information about the actual case publicly available at the moment. But it'll be interesting to see how this unfolds and whether they did this to avoid Ian Collins and Will Guyatt and others from putting themselves forward to get a couple of quid out of this.
Well, I find it rather interesting because everybody seems to have one of those stories, don't they? Guess what? I was talking about babies' nappies or a brand new car, and suddenly I get bombarded with... You know, I've never known whether that is just a coincidence that you might, and you just remember that one moment.
When you go home tonight,
yes,
talk to your partner about Wurzels records. Make a lot of conversation about wanting to buy a Wurzels LP. And let's see if you get any advertising or suggestions.
A Wurzel? Oh, the old combine harvester people.
Yeah, drink up v cider.
I've got a brand new combine at the Wurzels. Yeah, we're talking about the Wurzels.
You would never have had a conversation with your partner about the Wurzels.
Is that a known barometer of authenticity, the Wurzels, or did you just pluck that one? Yes, the Wurzels were an extraordinary state of affairs, weren't they? So we'll see. We'll find out whether we're bombarded with... I mentioned it now, my phone is sitting, like in front of me.
Yeah, combine harvester.
Lapstop, yeah, and I'm a cider drinker. That was I think you just referenced that. That was another one. They probably made a fat pile of cash
They're still going. One of them's 86. He's nearly as old as you.
He's still going?
Yeah.
What, on his own?
Going. No, the band is still. They're still. I think they keep when they age out, and I'm using that term euphemistically. Others replace them, but I think the lead singer is at least 86 and still performs on a semi-weekly basis. The drummer used to go on stage with an oxygen mask in order to keep drumming, but unfortunately they now have a new drummer. But the Wurzels are a West Country institution, and I know you wouldn't have been talking about them in your house, so that's why I'm suggesting testing the Wurzels as an example of whether it picks anything.
Will I be bombarded either with Wurzels merch or with ads for combine harvesters? I don't know. We will see. We know what happened the last time somebody prominent said they were looking at tractors and combine harvesters on their phone. So we'll see. Just briefly, Will, 2025, look, AI has hardly begun its journey now. A bit disappointed with the Apple thing. I can make some funny emojis. I mean, really? I don't even know if that's AI, frankly. That's just a bit of technology, isn't it?
It's in early development still, the Apple stuff, so give them credit where credit's due. It's in beta at the moment, so you're going to see more features rolling out of that in the new year. In terms of what's happening with AI this year, it's really interesting to see where we're going to end up. I don't necessarily think we're going to end up with artificial general intelligence this year, which is when the the software starts thinking for itself, but all companies are kind of pushing towards that. I think we'll get some more big moves in health, some suggestions of, how AI is going to detect illnesses, etc., diseases quicker. And you might even find it being used to start analysing data and results, which might actually help speed up some of the delays within the health system. But a lot of that would come from people opening up the rights for their data to be used by the NHS to be analysed in that way. And unfortunately, in the same way as, the tinfoil hatters get out there and suggest that there's a huge conspiracy with our health data, that might actually slow down the use of AI to detect illness and hopefully keep us healthier as a society.
So you think AI is definitely going to be the big headline stuff this year?
Yeah, I think it's that, and I think it's also going to be law versus tech. If Elon Musk keeps going the way he's going, you might find his service banned in a number of countries. That would be quite a revelation. I also think we might find a situation where Google itself may get broken up, which is currently a conversation in the US. If Donald Trump doesn't scrap that, that's going to be a huge change to how the internet and how technology works, because Google have been such a dominant company. Will this enable somebody else to come through?
We will see and watch with interest. We will speak in a week. He is Will Guyatt, Talk's tech correspondent, with us on the programme. Sometimes divides the room a little, our Will, particularly on that specific issue of Elon Musk, which is curious. Peter Cardwell is with us. You must be fascinated by about this as well, Will. I don't know what it is. If he was saying all that stuff about Bill Gates, he wouldn't get any kind of...
Well, I find this fascinating that some people say, oh, why should an American have anything to do with our politics? Well, we have lots of opinions on American politics. True. And also saying, some business person interfering in politics. Business people have always had opinions on politics. They make the world go round with their money. I mean, it's a perfectly
Charlie Mullins doesn't stop talking about why he's legged it to the Costa. And I'm with him 100%.
Look, when he says Jess Phillips is a rape genocide apologist, I think that's going too far. I think it's inaccurate. I'm not someone who will defend...
It's a bit strong and it's not pleasant, but also we marry these things up with the free speech argument.
Well, certainly. Well, of course we do, and we can disagree without being disagreeable. Also, the fact that Labour has blocked a grooming gang inquiry, we've seen that with Oldham. In fact, in my programme, we're going to be talking to a councillor in Oldham about why they want the inquiry, actually, not just talking about this in the
round. The previous Oldham administration didn't want the inquiry,
Yes, exactly.
So this has changed because they've had a change.
And had loads of recommendations as well, because there were many recommendations from the Child Sexual Exploitation Inquiry. So Conservatives sat on it for 18 months. Labour hasn't done anything about it in 6 months. So this row goes on. We'll talk about that. Also about kicking things down the road. Social care, nothing's going to happen for 3 years. I don't know about you, but it seems to me in so many things, with the NHS, for example, as well, it's so clear what needs to happen. Why do we need another inquiry? We've had the Dilnot review with social care. Why don't they just get on and do it? Well,
and also with social care, the other thing that gets lost in this argument a lot, and it should always be highlighted, is social care isn't just about looking after elderly people. Social care covers, as you know, a big, wide brief about people of all ages with all sorts of